She came west expecting a husband who would court her with flowers and poetry. What she got was a man who wouldn't speak, a house with no curtains, and land so hostile it seemed determined to kill her. Evelyn Hartwell stepped off that dusty coach into a marriage that felt more like a sentence, until the night the stampede came, and she discovered that some men don't say love. They prove it, with blood, bone, and impossible choices. This is that story. If you want to see how far a silent man will go to protect what's his, stay until the end. And hit that like button. Drop a comment with your city so I can see just how far this wild tale travels. The stagecoach hit another rut, and Evelyn's head cracked against the wooden frame hard enough to make her ears ring. She didn't cry out. Hadn't cried out for the last 60 miles, even when the wheel nearly came off outside Silver Bend, and they'd all thought they were going to die right there in the dust. Her traveling companion, a whiskey drummer named Hewitt, who smelled like old sweat and optimism, had stopped trying to make conversation somewhere around the third day. "Dry Hollow Ridge," the driver called down. His voice scraped raw from trail dust. Evelyn pressed her gloved hand against the window frame and looked out at what was supposed to be her new home. The town, if you could call it that, consisted of maybe 24 buildings scattered along a single rutted road, like someone had thrown dice and let them land where they would. Everything looked sun-bleached and half-finished. A mercantile with boards missing from its false front. A saloon that leaned slightly to the left, as if the wind had been pushing at it for years and was slowly winning. No church, no school that she could see, just hard-packed earth, skeletal buildings, and mountains rising in the distance like broken teeth. "This is it?" The words came out before she could stop them. Hewitt laughed, not unkindly. "What'd you expect, miss? This ain't Boston." No, it certainly wasn't. Boston had trees, cobblestones, gas lamps that turned the evening streets into something almost magical. Here, there was just sun and dust and a wind that carried the smell of sage and something ranker, cattle probably, or horses, or the accumulated sweat of men who worked themselves half to death just to survive. The coach lurched to a stop in front of what looked like a trading post. Evelyn waited, heart hammering, scanning the handful of people on the street. Women in faded calico, men in work-stained clothes and hats pulled low, no one who looked like they were waiting for a bride. The driver opened the door and offered his hand. "Watch your step, miss." She descended carefully, her traveling dress, already filthy despite her best efforts, catching on the step. The ground felt wrong under her feet, unsteady, like the earth itself didn't want her here. "Miss Hartwell?" The voice came from behind her, low and rough. She turned. The man standing there wasn't what she'd expected either. Tall, yes. The letters had mentioned that. Broad-shouldered, work-hardened. But Rowan Hale's photograph, the single carefully posed image he'd sent 3 months ago, hadn't captured the sheer severity of him. His face looked like it had been carved from the same rock as those mountains, all hard angles and weathered lines, a scar running from his left temple down past his ear. His eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and unreadable. He wore rough canvas pants, a shirt that had once been blue, and a hat with a torn brim. He didn't smile. "Mr. Hale," Evelyn tried to keep her voice steady. Yes, Evelyn Hartwell." He nodded once, then reached for her trunk without asking. Lifted it like it weighed nothing, which it didn't. She'd left most of her life behind in Boston, brought only what the matrimonial agent said she'd need. Practical things, durable things. Nothing delicate survived out here, the woman had warned her. Evelyn was starting to understand what she'd meant. "The wagon's there," Rowan gestured with his chin toward a flatbed wagon hitched to 2 massive draft horses. Not a carriage, not even a buckboard with a proper seat, just rough planks and hay. "Oh," she stared at it. "I see." He loaded her trunk, then stood there waiting. After a moment, Evelyn realized he expected her to climb up herself. She gathered her skirts, already dusty, already ruined, and hauled herself onto the wagon bed with as much dignity as she could manage, which wasn't much. Her hands were shaking. Rowan swung up beside her, took the reins, and clicked his tongue. The horses started forward without fanfare, pulling them away from what passed for civilization and out into the open country. They rode in silence. Evelyn kept waiting for him to say something. Anything. Ask about her journey, comment on the weather, explain where they were going or how long it would take. But Rowan just drove. his eyes fixed on the trail ahead, his jaw set like he was bracing against something she couldn't see. The silence stretched, became unbearable. "Your letters," she finally said, desperate to fill the void, "were very informative about the ranch, the land." He glanced at her briefly, then back at the road. "Good." That was it, just good. One word in that gravelly voice, then nothing. Evelyn's throat tightened. The matrimonial agent had warned her that frontier men weren't always refined, that she'd need to adjust her expectations. But she'd imagined someone warm, someone grateful for companionship. The letters had been sparse, yes, but they'd been honest, descriptions of the ranch, the work, the life he was offering. She'd read between the lines and convinced herself there was loneliness there, a man who needed someone. Maybe she'd been wrong. The land rolled past in shades of brown and gray-green, sagebrush, rocky outcroppings, the occasional twisted juniper clinging to a hillside, no farms that she could see, no neighbors, just emptiness that went on forever, broken only by those distant mountains and a sky so vast it made her feel microscopic. "Is it far?" she asked. "The ranch?" "Another hour." 2 whole words this time. Progress. She tried again. "The town seemed small." "It is." "How often do we go in?" He was quiet so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "When we need to." Here's the thing about silence. It gets heavier the longer it sits. Evelyn had grown up in a house full of chatter, 4 sisters who talked over each other at dinner, a mother who narrated her every thought. Even after the fever took her parents and her sisters scattered to marriages and jobs, she'd had the boarding house, Mrs. Chen, and her endless opinions about everything from politics to pie crust. Silence was something Evelyn had experienced in churches, in libraries, in the moments before sleep. This wasn't that kind of silence. This was absence. Like Rowan had looked at her, cataloged what she was, and decided conversation wasn't worth the effort. The wagon hit a rock and she grabbed the side to keep from sliding. Rowan's hand shot out, steadied her elbow, then withdrew just as quickly. The touch was impersonal, efficient, like helping a piece of cargo. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. They crested a low rise and Evelyn saw the ranch for the first time. It sat in a shallow valley, backed against a line of cottonwoods that suggested water, a creek maybe. The house was small, rough lumber gone gray from weather, a stone chimney at one end, a barn that looked newer than the house, a corral with 3 horses, a few outbuildings she couldn't identify, no garden that she could see, no flowers, nothing soft. "Here," Rowan said, as if she might have missed it. He pulled the wagon up in front of the house and jumped down, then reached up to help her. Evelyn took his hand, calloused, strong, impersonal again, and climbed down. Her legs felt unsteady after so many hours of travel. The front door wasn't locked. Rowan pushed it open and stood back, waiting. Evelyn stepped inside and stopped. The room was bare. A table, scarred and rough-hewn. 2 chairs. A wood stove against the far wall. Shelves with some dishes, canned goods, basic supplies. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor. No pictures, no books. No sign that anyone actually lived here beyond basic survival. "I'll get your trunk," Rowan said behind her. She heard him walk back out, heard the thump of the trunk being lifted, and she stood there in the middle of that empty room, surrounded by nothing, and felt something crack open in her chest. What had she done? The matrimonial agent had shown her Rowan's advertisement. Rancher seeking practical woman for marriage. Must be hardy, willing to work. No need for refinement, need for partnership. Evelyn had been in the office looking for seamstress positions, clerk work, anything to keep herself fed now that the boarding house was being sold. The agent had pushed the advertisement at her almost as an afterthought. "You're educated," the woman had said. "You can read, write, manage a household. Men out west pay good money for that." It hadn't been about love. Evelyn understood that. It was about survival, his and hers. A transaction. But she'd still imagined something. A beginning, at least. A foundation to build on. This felt like ending up nowhere. Rowan came back in, set her trunk against the wall. "Bedroom's there." He pointed to a doorway she hadn't noticed, partially hidden by shadow. "I'll take the barn until..." He stopped, jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite spit out. Until you're ready. Until she was ready. For what? For him? For this marriage that didn't feel like a marriage at all? That's considerate, Evelyn managed. He looked at her then, really looked, and for just a second she saw something flicker in those winter eyes. Not warmth exactly, more like recognition, like he knew this was awful and wrong and not what either of them had wanted, but here they were anyway. Water's from the creek, he said, pointing toward the back. Privy's out behind the barn. I bring in firewood mornings. Breakfast is sunup, dinner's sundown. If you need something from town, make a list. He was giving her instructions, a manual for surviving him. All right, Evelyn said. Another pause. Then Rowan grabbed his hat, which he'd taken off when he entered, she realized, some old instinct for manners buried under all that silence, and put it back on. I've got work, he said, and walked out. The door closed behind him and Evelyn was alone. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the sound of his boots crossing the yard, the creak of the barn door. Then she walked to the bedroom, pushed open the door, and found exactly what she expected. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single window with no curtain. Her new life stripped down to its bones. Evelyn sat on the bed, the ropes creaked under her weight, and put her face in her hands. She didn't cry, couldn't, somehow. The grief was too big and too formless. She'd known this wouldn't be easy. The West wasn't easy, everyone said so. But knowing it and living it were different things entirely. After a while, she stood up, smoothed her dress, opened her trunk and stared at the contents. 3 practical dresses, undergarments, a coat, her mother's silver hairbrush, the book of Tennyson her sister Margaret had given her. Things that belonged to a different Evelyn, one who'd had choices. She changed out of her traveling dress into a simpler calico work dress, pinned her hair back more severely, and went to explore the house. It didn't take long. One main room serving as kitchen and living space. The bedroom. A narrow loft accessible by a ladder, filled with what looked like winter supplies and old tools. That was it. The kitchen area had basics: flour, salt, coffee, beans, some dried meat. A few eggs in a bowl. The stove looked functional but well used. Evelyn had learned to cook out of necessity after her parents died, but this was different. This wasn't cooking for herself in Mrs. Chen's kitchen with its modern conveniences. This was frontier cooking, everything from scratch, nothing wasted. She found a bucket and went to get water. The creek was down a short path through the cottonwoods, running clear over smooth stones. Pretty, actually, in a wild sort of way. Evelyn filled the bucket and hauled it back, sloshing water on her skirt, her arms burning by the time she reached the house. 2 trips for enough water to cook and clean. Everything here was work. She made coffee, strong and bitter, the way the pot suggested Rowan liked it, and set about figuring out dinner. The eggs were easy enough. There was bread, dry but edible. She found potatoes in a bin and started peeling, her hands clumsy with the unfamiliar knife. Outside, she could hear Rowan working, the steady rhythm of hammer on wood, a horse whinnying, the creak of the barn door. He didn't come to the house. Dinner was ready at sundown, like he'd said. Evelyn set the table, 2 plates, 2 cups, and waited. He came in exactly when the light started to fail, hung his hat on a peg by the door, washed his hands in the basin she'd set out, sat down without comment and looked at the food: fried eggs, boiled potatoes, the bread. Thank you, he said, and started eating. Evelyn sat across from him and picked at her own plate. The eggs were overcooked, the potatoes underseasoned. She'd done her best, but everything tasted wrong, like even the food knew she didn't belong here. They ate in silence. When he finished, Rowan stood, carried his plate to the basin, and paused. It's good, he said, not looking at her. The food. Thank you. Then he was gone again, back to the barn. Evelyn washed the dishes and water she had to heat on the stove, dried them, put them away. The house felt enormous and claustrophobic at the same time. Outside, night had fallen completely, and through the uncurtained windows she could see stars. More stars than she'd ever seen in her life. A sky absolutely dense with them, beautiful and utterly indifferent. She went to bed in that narrow room, listening to the wind and the distant sound of cattle and the creaking of unfamiliar walls. Sleep was a long time coming. The days that followed formed a pattern. Rowan rose before dawn. She'd hear him moving around outside doing whatever ranchers did in the pre-dawn darkness. He'd bring firewood, stack it by the stove without waking her. By the time Evelyn got up, there'd be coffee already made, left warming on the stove. He never drank it with her, just made it and left. Breakfast, work, dinner, silence. She tried talking to him, asked about the ranch, the cattle, what he needed her to do. His answers were functional. Herds up in the north pasture need to check the fence line. If you can manage it, bread's running low. No conversation, no questions about her life, her past, what she thought or felt or needed, just instructions and facts. The work was relentless. Evelyn learned to make bread that didn't come out like rocks, though it took a week and several inedible failures. Learned to judge the stove's temperature by feel since there was no thermometer. Learned to stretch supplies, to make coffee last, to turn dried meat and beans into something that resembled food. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her back ached from hauling water. She fell into bed exhausted every night and woke up sore every morning. And Rowan stayed distant, present but absent, there and gone. 2 weeks in, Evelyn broke a cup, stupid clumsy. She was washing dishes and it slipped, shattered on the floor. She stood there staring at the pieces, and something in her snapped. She sat down right there among the shards and started to cry. Not delicate tears, but ugly sobs that came from someplace deep and desperate. She didn't hear Rowan come in. "You hurt?" His voice made her jump. She looked up, and he was there, framed in the doorway, tools in hand, concern etched into those hard features. "No, She tried to wipe her face. "I'm fine. Just clumsy." He set the tools down, crossed the room, crouched beside her, looked at the broken cup, then at her hands, checking for cuts. His movements were careful, deliberate. "It's just a cup," he said quietly. "I know." Her voice came out thick. "I know it's just a cup." They stayed there for a moment, Rowan kneeling among broken ceramic, Evelyn trying to pull herself together. Then he stood, got the broom, and swept up the pieces without another word. When he was done, he looked at her. "First year's hard," he said. "Takes time." It was the most personal thing he'd said to her since she'd arrived. "Is it always this quiet?" Evelyn asked, the question escaping before she could think better of it. Rowan's jaw tightened. "I'm not much for talking." "I noticed." Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or shame. He looked away. "If you need different—" "No." She stood up, brushed off her skirt. "I'm sorry. That wasn't fair." He nodded slowly, then picked up his tools and left. That night, there were wildflowers on the table when she came out of the bedroom. Just a handful, nothing fancy. Indian paintbrush and lupine, probably picked on his way back from the north pasture. No note, no explanation. Evelyn stared at them for a long time. The next morning, the coffee was waiting again. And beside it, a new cup to replace the one she'd broken. She started paying attention differently after that. Started noticing things she'd been too overwhelmed to see before. The way Rowan positioned the firewood so she could reach it easily. How he'd fixed the loose step on the porch without mentioning it. The fact that her favorite eggs, the brown ones from the speckled hen, always ended up in the bowl, even though the white ones were bigger. Small things. Quiet things. He wasn't cruel. Wasn't unkind. He just didn't use words where actions would do. 3 weeks in, Evelyn decided to learn the ranch. She'd been staying close to the house, overwhelmed by just managing the domestic work. But if this was her life now, she needed to understand it. She found Rowan mending fence in the near pasture. He looked up when she approached, surprise crossing his face. "Can I help?" she asked. He hesitated, then handed her a pair of wire cutters. "Cut the old wire while I string new." They worked together in the morning sun. It was hard, frustrating work. The wire fought her, bit into her gloves, refused to cut cleanly. Rowan didn't comment on her clumsiness, just occasionally reached over and showed her the angle to use, the way to brace the wire. Teaching without words. By noon, Evelyn's hands were screaming and they'd finished maybe 30 feet of fence. "That's enough," Rowan said, taking the cutters. "Good work." 2 words that felt like a speech. They walked back to the house together, and Evelyn realized something. Out here, doing the work beside him, the silence didn't feel as heavy. It felt companionable almost. Like they were speaking a different language, one made of shared effort and mutual survival. That night, she made stew. Actually made it, not just threw things in a pot. Used the dried beef, some carrots she'd found in the root cellar, potatoes, herbs she'd gathered near the creek. It took hours. Rowan ate 3 bowls. "It's good," he said, and this time he looked at her when he said it. "Thank you." He nodded. Then, "You worked hard today, on the fence." "I tried." "You did more than try." He paused, considering his words carefully. "You're tougher than you look." It was a compliment, a real one. Evelyn felt something warm unfold in her chest. "I'm learning," she said. "We both are." That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Evelyn went to bed without that crushing weight of loneliness. She was still alone in that narrow room, still living with a man who barely spoke, still trapped in a life she hadn't chosen. But something had shifted. Some small recognition that maybe this wasn't a sentence after all. Maybe it was just difficult, and difficulty could be survived. The next weeks brought a rhythm. Evelyn learned the ranch's patterns, the cattle's needs, the way weather moved across the valley. Learned which chores could wait and which couldn't. Learned to read the sky for rain. Learned the difference between the productive silence of shared work and the empty silence of loneliness. Rowan remained Rowan, sparse with words, generous with action. He brought her things. A length of fabric from town for curtains, though he didn't say why. A book, nothing fancy, just a worn copy of frontier poetry, left on her pillow. Coffee beans, the good kind, when she mentioned once that she missed the coffee from Boston. They had a language now, not words, but understanding. And then 5 weeks after Evelyn arrived, the sky changed. She noticed it first at breakfast. A peculiar quality to the light, a thickness to the air, Rowan noticed too. He stood at the window, coffee forgotten, staring north. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "Storm coming." His voice was tight. "Bad one. Should we prepare?" He turned to her, and the look on his face made her stomach drop. Not fear exactly. Something worse. Resignation. "Get everything inside that'll blow," he said. "Secure the shutters. Fill every container with water." "What are you going to do?" "Bring the herd down. They're up in the high country. If they stampede in a storm..." He didn't finish, didn't need to. Evelyn had heard enough stories by now to know what a stampede could do. "I'll help," she said. "No." Flat, absolute. "You stay here. Keep the house safe." "Rowan." "Evelyn." He said her name like it cost him something. "Please." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist, but the look in his eyes, concern, real concern for her, stopped her. "All right," she said. "Be careful." He nodded, grabbed his hat and coat, and was gone. Evelyn spent the next hours doing exactly what he'd told her. Brought in the tools, the washing, anything that could become a projectile. Closed the shutters and latched them tight. Filled buckets, pots, even the bathtub with water. The sky kept darkening, turning a sick greenish gray. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up, howling around the house corners, rattling the shutters. Evelyn lit lamps against the growing darkness and tried not to think about Rowan out there alone with hundreds of half-wild cattle and a storm bearing down. The rain started just before sunset, huge violent drops that hammered the roof like fists. Then came the lightning, great jagged bolts that lit up the whole valley, and thunder that shook the walls. Evelyn sat at the table, hands clenched, listening to the storm devour the world outside. Hours passed. No sign of Rowan. Midnight came and went. The storm intensified, if that was possible. Evelyn couldn't see anything through the shuttered windows, could only hear the chaos. Wind, rain, thunder, and underneath it all, a new sound. A rumbling. Growing louder. She realized what it was a second before the ground started shaking. Stampede. The cattle were running, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, their hooves like an earthquake. The whole house vibrated. Evelyn pressed herself against the wall, praying the herd would miss the buildings, that Rowan had turned them somehow, that... The sound peaked, so loud she couldn't think, and then shifted, changed direction. The rumbling moved away, heading south, fading slowly into the general roar of the storm. Someone had turned them. Evelyn waited, heart hammering, as the storm finally began to ease. The rain softened to a steady pour. The thunder moved east, and still no Rowan. Dawn came gray and cold. Evelyn opened the shutters, looked out at a world transformed. Everything was mud and debris, branches down. The corral fence partially collapsed. But the building stood. The barn was intact. And there, coming up the path from the south pasture, was a figure on horseback. Rowan. Evelyn ran outside, not caring about the mud, the rain still falling in light sheets. He was slumped in the saddle, barely holding on, and when he saw her, he tried to sit up straighter. Failed. "Turn them," he said, his voice barely audible. "Herds south now. Safe." Then he started to fall. Evelyn caught him, barely, his weight nearly taking them both down. She could see blood on his shirt, his face, couldn't tell where it was all coming from. "Inside," she said. "Come on, help me." Together, her pulling, him stumbling, they made it to the house. Evelyn got him to the bed more through momentum than strength. Rowan collapsed onto it like a felled tree, his breathing shallow and ragged. Blood soaked through his shirt in 3 places she could see. Maybe more she couldn't. His face was gray under the mud and cuts, lips cracked, eyes unfocused. "Where are you hurt?" Her hands were already moving, unbuttoning his shirt with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. "Rowan, where?" "Ribs," he managed. "Left side, got thrown. Horse went down in the—" He stopped, coughed, and blood flecked his lips. Evelyn's stomach lurched, but she pushed the fear down, buried it someplace deep. She'd nursed her mother through the fever's final days, had cleaned wounds on her sister's children after playground accidents. This was worse, so much worse, but the principle was the same. Stop the bleeding, clean the wounds, keep him alive until his body could do the rest. She peeled the shirt back and had to bite her tongue to keep from gasping. A massive bruise spread across his left side, purple-black and swollen. 3 deep gashes ran along his ribs where something, a horn maybe, or debris from the storm, had torn through skin and muscle. Another cut on his shoulder, not as deep but still bleeding freely. Scrapes and bruises everywhere else, his whole torso a map of violence. "I need to clean these," she said, forcing her voice steady. "It's going to hurt. Already hurts." He tried to smile, failed. "Do what you need." Evelyn grabbed the water she'd stored, clean rags, the bottle of whiskey Rowan kept in the cupboard for emergencies. This qualified. She poured whiskey over the worst gash and Rowan's whole body went rigid, a strangled sound escaping through his clenched teeth. "I'm sorry," she whispered, pressing a cloth against the wound to staunch the bleeding. I'm sorry. Don't." His hand found hers, gripped it hard enough to hurt. "Don't apologize for keeping me alive." She worked for what felt like hours, cleaned each wound with whiskey, which made Rowan curse in ways she'd never heard him speak before. Stitched the deepest gash with shaking hands and thread meant for mending shirts. Not ideal, not clean enough, but it was what she had. Wrapped his ribs as tight as she dared with strips torn from an old sheet. By the time she finished, Rowan had passed out, which was probably a mercy. Evelyn sat beside the bed, bloody rags piled around her, and let herself shake. Her dress was ruined, her hands were stained red. And the man she'd married, this stranger who wouldn't talk to her, who left her flowers and fixed things in silence, was broken and bleeding because he'd ridden into a stampede alone. "You idiot," she said to his unconscious form. "You complete idiot." But even as she said it, she was pulling the blanket over him, checking his breathing, pressing the back of her hand to his forehead to gauge for fever. He was burning up already. Infection, probably. Out here, that could kill him as surely as the injuries themselves. She spent the rest of the day between the bed and the stove, boiling water, preparing poultices from the limited herbs she'd gathered, cooling his fever with damp cloths. Rowan drifted in and out, sometimes lucid enough to drink when she held water to his lips, sometimes lost in dreams that made him thrash and mutter things she couldn't understand. "Easy," she'd say, holding him down as gently as she could. "You're safe. You're home." Whether he heard her or not, she couldn't tell. Night fell again, and Evelyn lit every lamp in the house, unwilling to sit in darkness with Rowan like this. She dozed in the chair beside the bed, jerking awake every time his breathing changed or he moved. Around midnight, his fever spiked. She could feel the heat radiating off him. She stripped the blankets, sponged his whole body with cool water, and prayed to whatever forces governed this harsh land that he'd survive until morning. The herd. Rowan mumbled, eyes still closed. Did I? You turned them, Evelyn said, leaning close. You did it. They're south, you said. Safe. Good. He exhaled slowly. Good. Can't lose everything again. Again. The word caught in her mind. What had he lost before? But Rowan was already slipping back under, his face slack with exhaustion and pain. Dawn came slow and pale. Evelyn checked his wounds. The stitches were holding, no fresh bleeding, but the swelling was worse and red streaks were creeping out from the gash on his ribs. Infection setting in, just like she'd feared. She needed help, real help, a doctor. But the nearest doctor was in Dry Hollow Ridge, an hour away on a good day. In this mud, with the road washed out in places, it would take longer. And she couldn't leave Rowan alone that long. Couldn't risk him worsening while she was gone. Evelyn stood at the window watching the sun struggle through the remaining clouds and felt the impossible weight of the choice pressing down on her. Stay and hope she could manage alone, or go and risk coming back to find him dead. A sound from outside made her turn. Hoofbeats coming fast. She grabbed the rifle Rowan kept by the door. She'd never fired a gun in her life, but she held it anyway, and went to the porch. 3 riders were approaching, picking their way through the mud. As they got closer, Evelyn recognized one of them, Silas Cooper, the man who ran the mercantile in town. The other 2 she didn't know, but they had the weathered look of ranchers, men who spent their lives working this unforgiving land. "Mrs. Hale," Silas called out, pulling his horse to a stop at a respectful distance. "We saw the damage from the storm, came to check on folks. Your husband here?" Evelyn lowered the rifle slightly. "He's hurt, badly. He turned the stampede, saved the valley probably, but he's—" Her voice cracked despite her best effort. "He needs a doctor." Silas swung down from his horse, the other 2 following. "Let me see him." She hesitated, then nodded and led them inside. The 3 men stood around Rowan's bed, taking in his battered state, with expressions that shifted from shock to something like awe. Silas whistled low. "He rode into that storm alone?" one of the others asked, a younger man, maybe 30, with a thick beard. "There wasn't time for anything else," Evelyn said. "The herd was up in the high country. If they'd stampeded through the valley, we'd have lost everything," Silas finished. He looked at her with new respect. "Your husband just saved a dozen ranches, ma'am, maybe more." "He needs a doctor," Evelyn repeated, because gratitude wouldn't heal Rowan's wounds. "I'll ride for Doc Brennan," the bearded man said. "Push hard. I can be back before nightfall." "I'll stay," Silas said. "Help Mrs. Hale with what needs doing. Tom, you ride out to the other ranches. Let folks know what happened. They'll want to help." The 3rd man, Tom, nodded, and they were off, leaving Silas standing in the middle of the small house, hat in hand. "What can I do?" he asked. Evelyn looked around at the chaos. Bloody rags, mud tracked everywhere, dishes piled in the basin, the stove gone cold because she'd been too focused on Rowan to maintain it. Everything had fallen apart. "Help me get him clean," she said. "And then I need fresh water, firewood, and—" She paused, realized she was about to cry, fought it back. "And I need someone to tell me he's not going to die." Silas's face softened. "He's tougher than he looks, Mrs. Hale. I've known Rowan since he came out here 6 years back. Man survived things that would kill most folks. He'll survive this too." "You don't know that." "No," Silas admitted. "I don't. But I've got faith in stubborn men, and your husband's about as stubborn as they come." They worked together through the morning. Silas hauled water and firewood, fixed the worst of the mud damage, made himself useful without needing constant direction. Evelyn changed Rowan's dressings, got some broth into him during a lucid moment, monitored his fever. It wasn't dropping, but it wasn't climbing either. A holding pattern. Around midday, Silas made coffee and convinced Evelyn to sit down and eat something. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite of bread hit her stomach. "You're doing good," Silas said, sitting across from her at the scarred table. "Most women would have fallen apart by now." "I still might." Evelyn drank the coffee, which was terrible. Silas couldn't brew worth a damn, but hot and strong. "I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just doing. That's all any of us do out here," Silas stared into his own cup. You asked me what I know about Rowan dying. Want to know what I do know? Evelyn nodded. 6 years ago, Rowan came to Dry Hollow Ridge with a wife and a daughter. Little thing, maybe 4 years old. They'd bought this land, planned to build a life. That first winter was brutal, coldest anyone could remember. His wife took sick, pneumonia, died in January. Silas paused, his face grave. The daughter, Clara, her name was. She didn't make it either. Different sickness, came right after. Rowan buried them both up on the hill behind the barn. Evelyn's chest constricted. I didn't know. Nobody talks about it. Rowan sure as hell doesn't. After that, he just shut down. Worked himself half to death getting this ranch running, never talked to anybody unless he had to, lived out here alone for 5 years. Silas looked at her directly. When we heard he'd sent for a mail-order bride, folks were surprised. Didn't think he'd ever let anyone close again. He hasn't. The words came out bitter. He barely speaks to me. Maybe. Silas tilted his head. Or maybe he's speaking the only way he knows how. Rowan's not good with words, never was, even before. But actions? Man speaks volumes in actions. Evelyn thought about the coffee left warming each morning. The flowers, the new cup, the way Rowan had ridden into a storm alone to protect everyone else's livelihood, even knowing it might kill him. He's protecting me, she said slowly, understanding dawning. Keeping distance so it won't hurt if he loses you too, Silas finished. That'd be my guess. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that revelation settling over everything. Rowan wasn't cold. He was terrified. And he'd been living with that terror for 6 years, alone in this house, with ghosts buried on the hill. The thing is, Silas continued, Rowan rode into that stampede knowing full well he might die. But he did it anyway because that's who he is. He protects what's his. He looked toward the bedroom. And whether he said it out loud or not, you're his now. So yeah, he'll fight to survive this. Because men like Rowan don't quit. Evelyn wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. The afternoon dragged on. Rowan's fever climbed slightly, then fell, then climbed again. Evelyn kept up the routine, water, poultices, clean dressings, while Silas handled everything else. More riders came as word spread, ranchers stopping by to offer help, to ask after Rowan, to leave supplies on the porch with gruff words of gratitude. Tell him we're grateful, one older man said, twisting his hat in weathered hands. Tell him the valley's still standing because of what he did. Evelyn promised she would, though she wasn't sure Rowan would care. He hadn't done it for gratitude. He'd done it because it needed doing. Doc Brennan arrived just before sunset, a tall man with kind eyes and hands that moved with practiced efficiency. He examined Rowan while Evelyn and Silas waited in the main room, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. When the doctor emerged, his expression was carefully neutral. The stitching's decent, given what you had to work with. Ribs are cracked, not broken. Small blessing. The infection's the concern. I've cleaned the wounds better, applied proper salve, but the next 48 hours will tell the tale. Will he live? Evelyn asked bluntly. Doc Brennan met her eyes. If he wants to, yes. Your husband's strong, Mrs. Hale, and he's got something to live for now. He glanced around the small house, at the curtains Evelyn had made, the attempts at making this place a home. That makes a difference. He left medicine, instructions, and a promise to return in 3 days. Silas rode out with him, leaving Evelyn alone with Rowan as night fell again. She pulled the chair close to the bed and took his hand, calloused, scarred, still burning with fever. His eyes moved behind closed lids, dreaming or fighting or both. You have to stay, she said quietly. I know you're scared. I know you've lost everything before and you're terrified of losing it again. But I'm here, Rowan. I'm not going anywhere. So you have to fight. You have to... Her voice broke. Please. His hand twitched in hers, fingers curling slightly. Not conscious, probably. Just reflex. But she held on anyway. The second night was worse than the first. Rowan's fever spiked hard around midnight, his whole body shaking with chills despite the blankets Evelyn piled on him. She climbed into the bed beside him, propriety be damned, and held him, trying to share her warmth, talking to him in a steady stream of words about nothing and everything. When I was 10, she said, I stole a pie from Mrs. Hennessy's windowsill, blueberry. I ate the whole thing behind the church and got so sick I couldn't move for hours. My mother found me there and laughed so hard she cried. Then she made me apologize and work off the debt in Mrs. Hennessy's garden all summer. Evelyn smoothed damp hair back from Rowan's forehead. I hated every minute of that garden work, but Mrs. Hennessy taught me about herbs, about which plants heal and which hurt. And I'm using that now trying to keep you alive. So maybe stealing that pie was worth it. Well, spite that or tools. Rowan's shaking eased slightly. Evelyn kept talking. My sister Margaret used to say I was too stubborn for my own good. Said I'd argue with a fence post if I thought it was wrong. She was probably right. I argued with the matrimonial agent, told her I didn't want to go west, didn't want to marry a stranger, didn't want any of this. And she said, "Girl, sometimes what we want and what we need are different things." Evelyn's throat tightened. I think she was right too, because I needed this. Needed you. Even if you drive me crazy with your silence, even if this whole thing is hard and awful and nothing like I imagined, I need it. She stopped, realizing what she'd been about to say. That she needed him, this man she barely knew, who barely spoke, who'd shown her more through actions than most men showed through volumes of words. You have to live, she whispered against his shoulder, because I'm just starting to understand you, and it's not fair if you die before I figure out the rest. Dawn came gray and cold. Evelyn woke still curled against Rowan and realized two things. One, she'd fallen asleep at some point. Two, his fever had broken. She sat up carefully and pressed her hand to his forehead. Cool, not cold, not clammy, just normal. His breathing was deeper, steadier. The grayness had left his face. Rowan? She shook his shoulder gently. Can you hear me? His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening on her face. Evelyn. Her name. Just her name, but the way he said it, rough with sleep and pain, but somehow tender, made her chest ache. You're alive, she said, and started crying. Couldn't help it. All the fear and exhaustion and desperate hope came pouring out in messy, graceless sobs. Hey! Rowan tried to sit up, groaned, abandoned the effort. Hey, don't cry. I'm all right. You're not all right, you idiot. You're broken and bloody, and you almost died. Evelyn wiped her face furiously. What were you thinking, riding into that storm alone? Was thinking about you. The words came out quiet but clear. About the house. The valley. Couldn't let the stampede. He stopped, breathing hard from the effort of talking. Couldn't lose it. Not again. Silas told me, Evelyn said. About your wife, your daughter? Rowan's face went carefully blank. Silas talks too much. Maybe, or maybe not enough people talk to you. She took his hand, held it between both of hers. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you lost them. Was a long time ago. 6 years isn't that long. He looked away, jaw tight. Long enough. They sat in silence for a moment, but it wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of before. This was different, fragile, like something breaking open. I shouldn't have brought you here, Rowan said finally. Shouldn't have asked you to... He gestured vaguely at the house, the life, everything. This isn't what you signed up for. You're right, Evelyn said. I signed up for a partnership, a marriage. What I got was a ghost living in a house, too afraid to let anyone in. He flinched like she'd hit him. But here's the thing, she continued. I'm stubborn, and I don't quit. So you can keep pushing me away, keep living in fear that I'll die like they did, or you can... She stopped, searching for the right words. You can try. With me. Actually try. Rowan's throat worked. Don't know how. Neither do I. Evelyn smiled despite the tears still on her face. We'll figure it out together. That's what partnership means. He looked at her for a long moment, those pale eyes searching her face for something. Doubt, maybe, or escape routes. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him because he nodded slowly. All right, he said. We'll try. It was a start. A small, fragile, insufficient start. But it was something. The next days brought slow recovery. Rowan's wounds began to heal, though he moved like an old man, every breath carefully measured around his damaged ribs. Doc Brennan came back, pronounced him lucky, and left more medicine with strict instructions about rest. Rest, Rowan muttered after the doctor left. Got work to do. The work can wait, Evelyn said firmly. You can barely stand. Can't afford to wait. Herd needs checking. Fence needs... The fence is being handled. She pointed out the window, where 2 ranchers were working on the damaged sections. And the herd is fine. Silas organized the valley men. Everyone's pitching in until you're on your feet. Rowan stared at the workers like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Why? Boy, 'cause you saved their ranches, you stubborn man. Because people actually like you, even if you won't talk to them. Because out here, neighbors help neighbors. Evelyn crossed her arms. So you're going to sit there and heal and let them help. Understood? For a moment, she thought he'd argue. Then his mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. And he nodded. Yes, ma'am. It was the first time she'd heard anything like humor in his voice. The valley men came every day for 2 weeks, helping with the work Rowan couldn't do. They brought their wives, too, women who arrived with food and gossip and practical help. Evelyn found herself surrounded by a community she hadn't known existed, women who taught her the 1,000 small skills she'd need to survive out here. Coffee's better weak than strong, one woman advised, a sturdy grandmother named Ruth. Makes it last longer. Save your eggshells, another said. Crush them for the chickens. They need the calcium. And never ever trust a cloudless sky in spring, Ruth added with a knowing look. Storms come from nowhere out here. Evelyn absorbed it all, grateful for the knowledge and the company. The loneliness that had pressed down on her those first weeks lifted slightly. She wasn't alone anymore. She had neighbors, friends, maybe, in time. And she had Rowan, who watched her interact with these women with something like wonder on his face. You're good with them, he said one evening after everyone had left. He was sitting up now, moving around a bit, though still favoring his injured side. They're good to me, Evelyn corrected. Teaching me things you probably should have taught me from the start. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Didn't know how. You could have tried words. Novel concept. I know. That almost smile again. You're funny when you're mad. I'm not mad. She paused. All right, I was mad. But I'm getting over it. Good. Rowan stood carefully, crossed to where she was washing dishes. Stood beside her, not touching, just there. I'm trying, he said quietly. With the talking, it's hard. I know. But I want to. Try, for you. Evelyn set down the plate she'd been scrubbing and turned to face him. Why? Because you're here, he said simply. Because you stayed when you could have left. Because you saved my life and didn't ask for anything in return. He paused, working through the words like they cost him. Because I think maybe I could... He stopped, frustrated. Could what? Could love you, he said finally, the words rough and uncertain. If you'd let me. Evelyn's breath caught. It wasn't a declaration. Wasn't poetry or romance or anything like what she'd imagined in those long-ago days when she dreamed about marriage. But it was honest, real. Rowan offering her something precious and fragile, terrified she'd break it. I'd let you, she said softly. I am letting you. He nodded, relief flickering across his face. Then slowly, carefully, he reached up and touched her cheek. Just his fingertips, calloused and gentle. Testing. Evelyn leaned into the touch. They stood like that for a long moment, connected by that single point of contact, until Rowan's ribs protested and he had to step back. But something had shifted. Some wall had started to crumble. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep in the bedroom alone. She made a pallet on the floor beside Rowan's bed. He was still too hurt for the narrow space to hold them both comfortably, and they talked in the darkness. Real talking, not just instructions and practicalities. Rowan told her about Clara haltingly at first, then with more ease. How she'd loved horses. How she'd made up songs about everything. How she'd called every animal on the ranch by elaborate names that made no sense. The chickens were all princesses, he said, and Evelyn could hear the smile in his voice even through the pain. Every single one. Princess Fluffbottom, Princess Peckalot. She took it real serious. She sounds wonderful. She was. Silence then. Her mother was too, Sarah. She hated the frontier at first, like you. But she was tough. Tougher than she knew. His voice dropped. I couldn't save them. It wasn't your fault. Feels like it was. Evelyn reached up from her pallet and found his hand dangling over the side of the bed. Held it. I'm here, she said. I'm not going anywhere. You can't promise that. No, she admitted. But I can promise I'll fight to stay. That good enough? Rowan's fingers tightened around hers. Yeah, that's good enough. They fell asleep like that, hands linked in the darkness. Two people learning to trust each other in a world that gave no guarantees. Morning brought Silas and 3 other men, all wearing serious expressions. Evelyn knew immediately something was wrong. What is it? Rowan asked, struggling to sit up. Silas removed his hat. There's trouble, Rowan. Garth Maddox. The name meant nothing to Evelyn, but Rowan's whole body went tense. What about him? He's claiming water rights to Sweetwater Creek, says it runs through his property first, gives him primary access. Wants to dam it up, sell water to the rest of us at premium prices. Silas's face was grim. If he does that, half the valley ranches will go under by summer, including yours. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, he can't do that. Creek's open water, always has been. He's got papers, one of the other men said. Filed claims with the territorial office. Says his grandfather established rights 50 years back. That's a lie. Maybe, but he's got a lawyer and we don't. And until someone challenges it proper. Silas spread his hands helplessly. Evelyn watched Rowan process this, saw the weight settle onto shoulders still healing from nearly dying. He'd saved the valley from the stampede, and now someone was trying to steal their water. It wasn't fair. Nothing out here was fair. We fight it, Rowan said finally. Get our own lawyer, pool resources if we have to. That'll take time and money most folks don't have, Silas said gently. And Maddox knows it. He's counting on us being too broke and too busy to fight back. Then what are we supposed to do? Evelyn asked, anger rising. Just let him steal the water? The men exchanged glances. Nobody had an answer. Rowan stood slowly, pain flickering across his face. I'll talk to him. You're in no condition, Evelyn started. I'll talk to him, Rowan repeated, steel in his voice. Maddox and I go back. Maybe I can make him see reason. The doubt on everyone's faces said exactly how likely they thought that was, but they nodded anyway, because what else could they do? After the men left, Evelyn helped Rowan into a clean shirt, her hands shaking with frustration. This is insane, she said. You can barely walk and you're going to confront some water thief? Someone has to. Let someone else do it. You've done enough. Rowan caught her hands, held them still. This is my home, Evelyn. Our home. I won't let Maddox take it without a fight. Our home. 2 words that carried so much weight she couldn't breathe. Then I'm coming with you, she said. No. Yes. She stared him down. You said we'd try. Partnership, remember? That means I don't sit home while you ride off to fight battles. That means we do this together. For a moment she thought he'd argue, pull rank, order her to stay. But something in her expression must have convinced him, because he exhaled slowly and nodded. Together, he said. They rode out an hour later, Rowan moving stiffly but determined, Evelyn beside him on one of the gentler horses. The Maddox Ranch lay northwest, bigger and more prosperous than most spreads in the valley. Garth Maddox had money, everyone knew it, though nobody knew where it came from. Rumor said inheritance. Rumor also said less legal sources. They found him at his barn, a thick-built man in his 50s with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. Rowan Hale, he said, looking Rowan up and down. Heard you had some excitement recently. Storm riding. Very heroic. The words dripped with mockery. We need to talk about Sweetwater Creek, Rowan said evenly. Nothing to talk about. Water's mine. It's open water, always has been. Maddox shrugged. My papers say different. You want to dispute them? Get a lawyer. Otherwise, I start damming next week. You do that and you'll kill every ranch in this valley. Not my problem. Maddox's smile widened. Though I might be willing to sell you water, at fair market rates, of course. There's nothing fair about what you're doing. Fair? Maddox laughed. This is business, Hale. Fair doesn't enter into it. His eyes slid to Evelyn. Pretty wife you got there. Shame if you couldn't afford to keep this ranch running. Might have to sell out, move on. Hard life for a lady, moving around like that. It was a threat, barely veiled, but clear as day. Rowan's hand moved toward the rifle on his saddle, and Evelyn's heart stopped. But he caught himself, fisted his hand instead. "You're making a mistake, Garth." "Am I?" "Because from where I stand, I'm about to control the most valuable resource in this valley, and there's nothing you or any of these dirt-poor ranchers can do about it." Maddox turned away, dismissing them. "Now get off my property before I have my men escort you." They rode back in tense silence. Rowan's jaw so tight Evelyn thought he might crack his teeth. When they reached home, he dismounted carefully and stood staring at the creek running through their property, the water that gave this land life. "We'll lose everything," he said quietly. "Without water, the herd dies. The ranch dies. Everything I built—" "We'll figure something out," Evelyn interrupted, but even she didn't believe it. What could they do against money and lawyers and corrupt claims? Rowan turned to her, and the despair in his eyes cut through her like a blade. "I finally let myself hope again," he said. "Let myself think maybe I could have this. Have you. Build something that lasts, and now—" He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Evelyn crossed to him, wrapped her arms around him as carefully as his injuries allowed. "We'll fight," she said fiercely. "However we have to, we'll fight." And standing there beside the creek that might be stolen from them, holding on to each other against impossible odds, they both knew the real battle was just beginning. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to Rowan's breathing from the bed, still uneven, still pained, and felt anger coiling in her stomach like a living thing. Garth Maddox's smug face kept appearing behind her closed eyelids, that cruel smile, the threat barely hidden in his words about her being too delicate for a hard life. She'd been underestimated her whole life. Too soft for the frontier, the matrimonial agent had warned, too refined, too Eastern, too likely to break under pressure. Even Rowan, in his way, had been protecting her like she was made of glass. But Evelyn hadn't broken. She'd stitched her husband back together with shaking hands and kept him alive through sheer stubborn will. She'd learned this land, learned its rhythms and its cruelties. She'd earned her place here, and she'd be damned if some corrupt rancher was going to take it from them. "You're thinking too loud," Rowan said from the bed, his voice rough with exhaustion. Evelyn sat up. "I'm thinking we need a plan. We need a miracle." He shifted, groaned softly. "Lawyers cost money we don't have, time we don't have. Maddox knows that." "Then we don't play his game." Evelyn stood, crossed to the window. The moon was up, painting everything in silver and shadow. "We find another way." "What other way is there?" She turned to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the darkness. "I don't know yet, but there has to be something. Some weakness, some—" She stopped, an idea forming. "Who else has Maddox hurt? There have to be others." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "Jake Morrison lost his land 2 years back. Maddox bought it for nothing when Jake couldn't pay his debts. There were rumors Maddox had arranged those debts somehow, but nothing anyone could prove. And the Chenoweth family, they had a dispute over property lines that Maddox won through some legal maneuvering nobody quite understood. So he's done this before. He's been doing it for years, just nobody's been able to stop him." Evelyn's mind raced. "Then we find proof. We find what he's really doing, and we expose it." "Evelyn, I know it sounds impossible, but what's the alternative? We just give up? Let him take everything?" She heard the bed creak as Rowan sat up. "It's dangerous. Maddox doesn't play fair. If he thinks you're digging into his business, let me worry about that. That's not how this works." His voice carried an edge now. "You're my wife. Your safety is—" "My choice," Evelyn interrupted. "You don't get to make decisions about what risks I take. That's not partnership, Rowan. That's you treating me like something fragile that needs protecting." The silence stretched between them, taut as wire. "I already lost a wife," Rowan said finally, the words coming out strangled. "Can't do that again." Evelyn's anger softened slightly. She crossed back to the bed, sat on the edge. "I'm not Sarah. I'm not going to die from pneumonia or get sick and fade away. I'm going to fight for what's ours. And you can either help me or get out of my way, but you can't stop me." She heard him exhale, a sound caught between frustration and something that might have been pride. "You're terrifying," he said. "Good. Maybe Maddox should be terrified too." Rowan's hand found hers in the darkness. "If we do this, and I mean if, We do it smart. Careful. No heroics. Says the man who rode into a stampede alone. That was different. How? That was just me risking my life. This is... He stopped, squeezed her hand. This is both of us. Higher stakes. Then we'd better not lose. Morning came with a plan that was barely a plan at all. Evelyn would go into town, talk to people, see what she could learn about Maddox's past dealings. Rowan would reach out to the other ranchers, see if anyone had documentation that might prove Maddox's claims were fraudulent. It wasn't much, but it was movement, action. Better than sitting and waiting for disaster. Be careful, Rowan said as Evelyn prepared to leave. Maddox has people in town. You start asking questions, he'll hear about it. I'm just a curious newcomer learning about my new home, Evelyn said lightly. Nothing threatening about that. You're a terrible liar. Then I'll have to tell the truth. She kissed his cheek, a quick, impulsive gesture that surprised them both. Don't do anything stupid while I'm gone. That's my line. The ride into Dry Hollow Ridge gave Evelyn time to think. She'd been so focused on survival those first weeks that she hadn't paid much attention to the town's dynamics. Who held power? Who owed whom favors? But she'd learned from the women who'd come to help during Rowan's recovery. Learned that Ruth knew everyone's business, that Silas extended credit to folks who needed it, and kept mental records of every debt and favor. That the saloon keeper, a sharp-eyed woman named Della, missed nothing that happened in her establishment. Evelyn started with Silas at the mercantile. He was restocking shelves when she entered, and his face brightened with genuine warmth. Mrs. Hale, good to see you. How's Rowan healing? Slow but steady, Evelyn wandered the store, running her fingers along fabric bolts, acting casual. I've been thinking about what you said, about Garth Maddox and his water claims. Silas's expression shuddered slightly. Difficult situation. You've been here a long time, haven't you? Seen how things have changed? 20 years. He set down a can with more force than necessary. Watched this town grow from nothing. Watched good people build lives here. And watched Maddox take from them? Silas glanced toward the door, checking they were alone. I didn't say that. But it's true, isn't it? Evelyn moved closer, lowered her voice. Jake Morrison, the Chenoweths. How many others? Mrs. Hale, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but Maddox is dangerous. He's got money, connections, and no conscience about using either. You start poking into his business, he'll bury you. He's already trying to bury us. The whole valley. Evelyn met his eyes directly. I'm not asking you to stand against him. I'm just asking if there's anything at all, that might help us understand what he's really doing. Silas was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face conflicted. Finally, talk to Jake Morrison. He's bitter, drinks too much, but he kept records. Everything Maddox did to take his land, Jake documented it. Whether that helps you or not, I can't say, but it's a start. Where can I find him? He's got a shack east of town, works odd jobs when he's sober enough. Silas hesitated. And Mrs. Hale? Be discreet. Maddox hears you're gathering information, things will get ugly fast. Evelyn found Jake Morrison's shack an hour later, a lean-to structure that looked like a strong wind might collapse it. The man who answered her knock was maybe 50 but looked 70, face ravaged by alcohol and bitterness. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking. What do you want? His words slurred slightly. My name is Evelyn Hale. I'm told you had trouble with Garth Maddox. Jake's face twisted. Everyone's got trouble with Maddox eventually. You're just figuring that out? He's claiming water rights to Sweetwater Creek, trying to force the Valley ranchers to buy from him. Sounds like Maddox. Jake leaned against the doorframe. He took my land same way. Legal tricks, falsified documents, debts that appeared out of nowhere. By the time I figured out what was happening, I'd already lost everything. Silas said you kept records. Fat lot of good they did me. But Jake stepped back, gestured her inside. The shack was cramped and smelled of whiskey and despair. He pulled a battered box from under a cot, opened it to reveal stacks of papers. Mortgage documents, loan agreements, property deeds, all of it showing how Maddox systematically destroyed me. Evelyn started looking through the papers, her heart sinking. The documents were dense with legal language she barely understood, full of clauses and stipulations that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. But a pattern emerged. Maddox had loaned Jake money at reasonable rates, then suddenly called in the debts early. When Jake couldn't pay, Maddox had bought the land at a fraction of its value. "This should be illegal," she said. "Should be, isn't. Maddox's lawyer makes sure everything's technically legal, even when it's completely corrupt." Jake took a swig from a bottle beside the cot. "I tried fighting it. Spent what little I had left on my own lawyer. Didn't matter. Maddox owns the territorial judge, or bribes him, or something. I never stood a chance. Can I borrow these? Make copies?" Jake laughed, a bitter sound. "Why? You planning to succeed where I failed?" "I'm planning to try." Something flickered in Jake's ravaged face. Respect, maybe, or pity. "Your funeral. But yeah, take them. Maybe they'll do you more good than they did me." He paused. Word of advice, though. Maddox doesn't just destroy people financially. He makes sure they're broken completely, ruins reputations, spreads lies, turns neighbors against each other. By the time he's done, you'll wish you'd just walked away. "I don't walk away." "Then you're braver or stupider than most." Jake handed her the box. "Good luck, Mrs. Hale. You're going to need it." Evelyn rode back toward the ranch with the box balanced in front of her, her mind churning. The documents proved Maddox's pattern of corruption, but Jake was right. Everything was technically legal. Immoral as hell, but legal. She needed something more, something that would expose him in a way he couldn't lawyer his way out of. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the riders until they were almost on top of her. 3 men on horseback blocking the road. Evelyn's heart jumped, but she kept her face neutral, her hands steady on the reins. "Mrs. Hale." The speaker was a lean man with a scar across his nose. "Mr. Maddox would like a word." "I'm busy at the moment." "Wasn't a request." The man moved his coat aside, showing the gun at his hip, not pointing it, not threatening directly, just showing. Evelyn's mouth went dry, but she lifted her chin. "Tell Mr. Maddox if he wants to speak with me, he can do so properly. At my home. With my husband present." "Your husband's in no condition to protect you, ma'am. Whole Valley knows that. So you'll come with us now, nice and peaceful, or we'll make it unpleasant." Every instinct screamed at her to run. But she was on a single horse. They were 3, and the road back to town was too far. She couldn't outrun them, couldn't fight them. Her only option was compliance or violence, and violence would end badly. "Fine," she said, keeping her voice level. "Lead the way." They took her to Maddox's ranch, the same barn where she and Rowan had confronted him days earlier. Maddox was waiting, that cold smile fixed on his face. "Mrs. Hale, kind of you to accept my invitation." "I didn't have much choice." "No, you didn't." He gestured to the box in her arms. "What's that you've got there?" Evelyn's heart hammered, but she met his eyes. "Supplies from town." "Supplies." Maddox stepped closer, reached for the box. Evelyn jerked it away, and one of his men grabbed her arm, twisted. She gasped in pain but didn't let go. Another man yanked the box from her grip, handed it to Maddox. He opened it, pulled out Jake's documents, and his smile widened. "Well now, this is interesting. Jake Morrison's pathetic attempt at record-keeping, and here you are, collecting it like it means something." "It proves what you are," Evelyn said through gritted teeth. "It proves I'm a good businessman." Maddox dropped the box, papers scattering. "But I appreciate you making this so easy. See, I was going to have to work harder to make an example of you. Now you've gone and given me everything I need." He turned to his men. "Mrs. Hale here has been stealing documents, trying to build some kind of case against me. Sad, really. Desperate woman trying to save her failing ranch by making false accusations." "That's a lie." "Is it? Who do you think people will believe? A respected landowner who's lived here for decades, or an outsider who showed up 6 weeks ago?" Maddox's smile never wavered. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go home. You're going to tell your husband to sell me his ranch at the price I offer. And you're going to stop asking questions about things that don't concern you. If you do that, we'll forget this unfortunate misunderstanding. And if I don't, then I'll make sure everyone in Dry Hollow Ridge knows what kind of woman Rowan Hale married. A thief, a liar, someone who'd do anything." He let the implication hang, ugly and clear. "To get what she wants. Your reputation will be destroyed. Your husband's too, by association. And you'll still lose the ranch, only you'll lose it with everyone thinking you deserve it." Evelyn felt sick. This wasn't just about water or land anymore. This was about power, about Maddox proving he could destroy anyone who challenged him. "You're a coward," she said quietly. "Hiding behind money and threats. You're pathetic." Maddox's smile finally slipped. His hand cracked across her face so fast she didn't see it coming. The impact snapped her head to the side, pain exploding through her cheek. She tasted blood. "Get her out of here," Maddox said coldly, "and make sure she understands what happens to people who call me names." The men dragged Evelyn outside, threw her onto her horse. One of them grabbed the reins, leading the horse away from the ranch while the other two followed. They didn't speak, didn't explain, just rode until they were a mile out, then stopped. The scarred man looked at her with something that might have been regret. "You should listen to Mr. Maddox, ma'am. He's not a forgiving man. Next time, it won't be just a slap." He released her reins, and the three of them turned back, leaving Evelyn alone on the road with a split lip and burning cheek and empty hands. Jake's documents were gone. Her one piece of evidence scattered across Maddox's barn floor. She rode home in a daze, adrenaline fading into shock. By the time she reached the ranch, her whole body was shaking. She barely managed to dismount before her legs gave out. Rowan found her in the yard, kneeling in the dust, trying not to cry. "Evelyn?" He was beside her in an instant, pain forgotten, hands on her shoulders. Then he saw her face, the split lip, the darkening bruise on her cheek, and everything in his expression went cold and deadly. "Who did this?" "Maddox's men, Her voice cracked. "They took Jake's documents, threatened me, said if we don't sell, he'll destroy our reputations, make it so nobody in this valley will help us." Rowan's jaw clenched so tight she heard his teeth grind. Did they hurt you anywhere else?" "No, just this." She touched her face, winced. "I'm sorry. I thought I could help. Thought I could find something to use against him. Instead, I just—" "You did nothing wrong." Rowan's voice was barely controlled fury. "This is on Maddox, all of it." He helped her inside, sat her down, and fetched water and clean cloth. His hands were gentle, but she could feel the rage vibrating through him as he cleaned her split lip. "I'm going to kill him," Rowan said quietly. "No, you're not. He had his men put hands on you, hit you, threatened—" He stopped, breathing hard. "I should ride over there right now and—" "And what? Get yourself killed? Arrested?" "That's exactly what he wants." Evelyn caught Rowan's hand, held it still. "He's trying to provoke us into doing something stupid, something that gives him an excuse to finish us off legally." "I don't care." "Yes, you do. You care about this ranch, about our life, about—" She stopped, realized what she was about to say. "About us. So you're not going to do anything reckless. We're going to think this through." Rowan stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "He hurt you." "I know. I was there." Evelyn managed a weak smile despite the pain in her lip. "But getting revenge won't save the ranch. Won't stop him from taking the water. We need to be smarter than him." "How?" "We've got nothing. No evidence, no leverage, no—" "We've got each other." Evelyn stood wobbly but determined. "And we've got the truth. Maddox is corrupt. He's been stealing from people for years. There has to be someone, some record, some witness, something that proves it." "Evelyn, I'm not giving up, Rowan. I've lost too much in my life already. My parents, my sisters to distance and circumstance. The life I thought I'd have. I'm not losing this too, not without a fight." She saw something shift in his face, the cold fury giving way to something else. Respect, maybe. A recognition that his wife was just as stubborn and reckless as he was. "All right," he said finally. "We fight, but we do it together. No more going off alone. No more taking risks without backup." Agreed. They spent the rest of the day planning, trying to find an angle Maddox hadn't already covered. Rowan sent word to the other ranchers, calling a meeting. If they couldn't fight Maddox individually, maybe they could do it collectively. Pool resources, hire a lawyer together, challenge the water rights claim as a unified group. The meeting happened 2 nights later in the Dry Hollow Ridge Saloon after hours. Della, the owner, had offered the space and promised discretion. 13 ranchers showed up, their faces grim. Evelyn sat beside Rowan, her bruised cheek hidden as best she could manage, and listened as the men talked in circles. "We can't afford a lawyer good enough to beat Maddox. Even if we could, the territorial judge is in Maddox's pocket. We're fighting a losing battle here. So we just give up? Silas said, frustration clear in his voice. Let him take everything our family's built? I'm just saying we need to be realistic. Realistic as we're dead without that water, Rowan interrupted, his voice cutting through the debate. Every ranch here depends on Sweetwater Creek. Maddox dams it. We're done, all of us. So what do you suggest? One of the older ranchers asked. We already tried talking to him. Didn't work. Rowan glanced at Evelyn. She gave a small nod, encouraging. We prove his claim is fraudulent, Rowan said. He says his grandfather established water rights 50 years ago. Where's the original documentation? Who witnessed it? If we can prove those documents are forged or don't exist, his whole claim collapses. And how do we prove that? Another rancher asked. The territorial office is 3 days' ride. They're not going to let us just waltz in and examine their records. Then we find someone who will. Evelyn spoke up for the first time, and several men turned to look at her in surprise. There has to be a clerk, an assistant, someone who has access to those records and might be willing to help us. Why would they help us? Because maybe they're tired of corruption too. Maybe they want to do the right thing. Evelyn met their skeptical gazes. Or maybe they need money. We can scrape together a bribe if we have to. The room went quiet. Bribing officials wasn't something these honest ranchers wanted to consider, but desperation made people flexible. It's risky, Silas said slowly. If we get caught, we're already caught, Rowan said. Maddox has us cornered. Either we fight dirty or we lose everything. One by one, the ranchers nodded. It was an enthusiastic agreement, more like resigned acceptance that they were out of options. I'll go to the territorial office, a younger rancher named Caleb offered. I've got a cousin who works there as a clerk. Maybe he'll help. If not, maybe he can point us to someone who will. How long will that take? Someone asked. Week, maybe, if I push hard. We don't have a week, Rowan said. Maddox said he's starting work on the dam soon. Once it's built, then we slow him down, Evelyn interrupted. Everyone looked at her. If Caleb needs time to get those documents, we make sure Maddox can't finish his dam before we have what we need. How do we slow him down? Evelyn smiled despite her split lip. We make it difficult, every step of the way. Legal challenges, however flimsy. Questions about environmental impact. Property disputes. Anything to gum up the works and buy us time. That'll make him angry, Della said from behind the bar. Good, Evelyn replied. Angry people make mistakes. The plan was thin, built more on hope than strategy. But it was something. Caleb would ride out at first light for the territorial office. The rest of them would file every objection and challenge they could think of, flooding the system with paperwork that would take time to sort through. It wouldn't stop Maddox, but it might slow him down enough. One more thing, Rowan said as the meeting broke up. Maddox is going to retaliate. He already came after Evelyn. He'll come after all of us if he feels threatened enough. Everyone needs to be careful. Watch your backs. Don't go anywhere alone. The ranchers nodded grimly and filed out into the night. Evelyn and Rowan were the last to leave. Della stopped them at the door. That was brave, she said to Evelyn. Stupid, maybe, but brave. She hesitated. Watch yourself. Maddox doesn't just fight clean battles. He goes for blood. I noticed, Evelyn said, touching her bruised cheek. Della's face hardened. Yeah, I heard about that. If you need anything, a place to stay, information, whatever, you come to me. Maddox doesn't scare everyone. It was an offer of alliance from an unexpected quarter. Evelyn squeezed the woman's hand gratefully and followed Rowan out into the cold night. They rode home in silence, the enormity of what they'd started settling over them like a weight. They were challenging a man who'd built an empire on corruption and violence, a man who'd already proven he'd hurt anyone who got in his way. You're thinking too loud again, Rowan said as they approached the ranch. I'm thinking we might have just signed our own death warrants. Probably. He helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering on her waist. But at least we did it together. Despite everything, the fear, the pain, the impossible odds, Evelyn smiled. Together, she agreed. They spent the next days in a strange kind of limbo, waiting for Caleb to return, watching for Maddox's retaliation. It came sooner than expected. 3 days after the meeting, 2 of the ranchers who'd attended found their fence lines cut, their cattle scattered across the territory. It took days to round them up, and by then several had been stolen or lost. Maddox's message was clear: challenge him and suffer the consequences. But instead of intimidating the ranchers, it made them angry. These were people who'd survived droughts and storms and endless hardship. They didn't scare easy. Within a week, they'd repaired the fences, recovered most of the cattle, and doubled down on their legal challenges. Evelyn threw herself into the work, helping draft objections and petitions, even though her legal knowledge was minimal. She learned as she went, staying up late by lamplight reading through dusty law books Silas had found in storage. Rowan worked alongside her, his injuries healing enough that he could manage the ranch work during the day and the legal battle at night. They developed a routine, a rhythm. Working separately through the day, Rowan with the cattle, Evelyn with paperwork and organizing the valley's resistance. Coming together at night to compare notes, to plan, to simply exist in the same space without the weight of silence between them. "You're getting good at this," Rowan said one evening, reading through a petition Evelyn had drafted challenging Maddox's right to dam navigable waters. Legal language and everything. "I'm getting good at faking it," Evelyn corrected. "Half of this is probably nonsense. If it slows Maddox down, it's working nonsense." She looked up from the document she was reviewing, a property survey from 30 years ago that might prove Maddox's boundary claims were wrong. "Do you think we can actually win this?" Rowan was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I don't know. Maddox has every advantage, but—" He met her eyes across the table. "I think we've got something he doesn't." "What's that?" "People who actually give a damn. A community that's willing to fight for each other." He paused. "And you're terrifying when you're determined. I'll take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. They smiled at each other across the table, covered in papers and law books, and desperate hope. And for just a moment, the fear receded. Whatever happened, they were facing it together. The moment broke when they heard hoofbeats approaching fast. Rowan grabbed the rifle and went to the door while Evelyn quickly hid the most damaging documents. But it wasn't Maddox's men. It was Caleb, riding like hell itself, was chasing him. He nearly fell off his horse, stumbled to the porch. "I got it," he gasped. "I got the proof." Evelyn and Rowan exchanged glances, hope and disbelief warring on their faces. "What proof?" Rowan asked. Caleb pulled a leather satchel from his coat, thrust it at them. "Maddox's grandfather never filed any water rights claim. There's no record of it anywhere in the territorial archives. My cousin searched everything going back 70 years. The documents Maddox is using are complete fabrications." Evelyn felt her heart leap. "You're sure?" "Completely. And there's more." Caleb's face was flushed with excitement and exhaustion. "My cousin found records of other fraudulent claims Maddox filed over the years. Property deeds that don't match surveys, purchase agreements with forged signatures. He's been doing this for at least a decade, maybe longer." "Will your cousin testify to this?" Rowan asked, already thinking ahead. Caleb's face fell slightly. "That's the problem. He's scared. Doesn't want his name attached to any of it. But he made copies of everything. Said if we can find a way to get this in front of a judge who's not corrupt—" "The territorial judge is in Maddox's pocket," Evelyn said. "We need someone else." "Federal judge," Rowan said suddenly. "Water rights on this scale, affecting multiple properties, potential fraud in territorial records. That's federal jurisdiction if we frame it right." "Federal judges are in the Capitol," Silas said, appearing from the darkness. He'd followed Caleb, Evelyn realized. 3 weeks' travel. By the time we filed a case and got a hearing, Maddox would have the dam built and every one of us bankrupt, Rowan finished. The hope that had flared so bright moments ago began to dim. They had proof, finally, but no way to use it fast enough to matter. "Then we make sure he can't build that dam," Evelyn said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "If we can't stop him legally in time, we stop him physically." "You mean sabotage?" Caleb looked shocked. "I mean, we exercise our right to protect our property. That creek runs through our land too. If Maddox tries to dam it, we have every right to defend our water access." Evelyn's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. "We don't destroy his equipment. We just make it very difficult for him to use it. Slow him down until the federal case can be heard." "That's dangerous," Silas warned. "Maddox will see it as an act of war." "It already is a war," Rowan said, looking at Evelyn with something like awe. "We're just finally fighting back." They spent the rest of the night planning. It was risky, possibly illegal, definitely reckless. But it was the only play they had left. Caleb would ride to the Capitol, file the federal case with the documents his cousin had provided. The ranchers would take shifts watching the creek, making sure Maddox couldn't work on his dam without opposition. If he brought in workers, they'd be met by property owners exercising their legal rights. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. As dawn broke and Caleb rode out toward the Capitol, Evelyn stood beside Rowan, looking at Sweetwater Creek running clear and cold through their property, the water that gave this land life, the water worth fighting for. "Last chance to walk away," Rowan said quietly. "We push Maddox like this. There's no going back. He'll come at us with everything he's got." Evelyn thought about the life she'd left behind in Boston, the safe, predictable existence she'd given up for this harsh, uncertain frontier. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 weeks ago, frightened, lonely, convinced she'd made a terrible mistake. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone harder, stronger, someone who'd learned that love wasn't always gentle words and soft touches. Sometimes love was showing up, fighting beside someone, refusing to quit when quitting would be easier. "I'm not walking away," she said, taking Rowan's hand. "This is our home, our life, and I'll be damned if I let Garth Maddox take it from us." Rowan looked at her, and in his eyes she saw everything he couldn't quite say out loud. Fear and pride and something that looked a lot like love. "Then we fight," he said. And standing there beside the creek with dawn breaking over the mountains, Evelyn Hale prepared for war. The war started quietly. No gunfire, no dramatic confrontations, just ranchers appearing at the creek every morning before dawn, sitting on their own property lines with rifles across their laps and coffee growing cold in tin cups. Watching. Waiting. Maddox's workers showed up the third day, a crew of 12 men with equipment, lumber, tools for building a dam. They stopped when they saw the ranchers, confusion and then wariness crossing their faces. "This is private property," the foreman called out. "You folks need to move along." "We're on our own land," Rowan called back. He was positioned on his section of the creek bank, Evelyn beside him. "You're welcome to work on Maddox's property, but this creek runs through all our ranches. You touch it, you're trespassing. Mr. Maddox has legal water rights. Those rights are being challenged in federal court," Evelyn interrupted. "Until that case is resolved, this creek remains open water. You try to dam it, we'll treat it as theft of our property." The foreman looked uncertain. He'd been hired to build a dam, not navigate a property dispute. After a tense moment, he sent one of his men back to get Maddox while the rest stood around looking uncomfortable. An hour later, Maddox himself arrived, his face dark with fury. He took in the line of ranchers, 13 of them now, spanning both sides of the creek, and his jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake," he said, directing his words at Rowan. "I have legal documentation." "Forged documentation," Rowan replied. "We've seen the territorial records. Your grandfather never filed any water rights claim. You're trying to steal what was never yours." Maddox's eyes narrowed dangerously. "That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. And we filed a federal case proving it. Until that's resolved, this creek stays open. A federal case takes months, years sometimes." Maddox smiled coldly. "You think you can sit out here for years? You've got ranches to run, cattle to tend. You'll get tired, go home, and I'll build my dam anyway." "Maybe," Silas said from his position downstream. "Or maybe we take shifts, round the clock. Make sure you never get a chance." "You're bluffing." "Try us," Ruth called out. She was stationed on her late husband's property, a shotgun in her weathered hands. "We've got nothing but time, Maddox, and we're a lot more stubborn than you think." Evelyn watched Maddox's face cycle through emotions. Rage, calculation, contempt. He was trying to decide if they were serious, if they'd actually maintain this standoff. "You're costing me money," he said finally. "Every day I can't work is profit lost. I'll make sure you pay for that. Every single one of you." "Add it to our tab," Rowan said flatly. Maddox stared at him for a long moment, then turned and stalked back to his horse. His workers followed, loading up their equipment. But Evelyn saw the foreman glance back at the creek, at the ranchers holding their ground, and something like respect crossed his face. "That went better than expected," Silas said once Maddox was out of earshot. "He'll be back," Rowan said. "And next time he won't try to talk." Rowan was right. 2 days later, Maddox's men returned. Different men this time, harder looking. Not construction workers, but hired guns. The kind who didn't care about property disputes or legal niceties. They set up on Maddox's side of the creek and started working, clearly daring the ranchers to do something about it. The ranchers watched, but didn't move. They couldn't legally stop Maddox from working on his own land. The question was whether the dam construction would stay on his property or cross into the creek bed itself, which ran through everyone's land. For 3 days, both sides maintained their positions. The hired guns built support structures on Maddox's bank, while the ranchers watched every movement, documenting everything. Evelyn took notes, sketched rough diagrams of where equipment was being placed. If this went to court, they'd need evidence of exactly what Maddox had done. The tension was exhausting. Everyone was on edge, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. It came on the 4th day. Maddox's men started driving pilings into the creek bed itself, metal supports that would form the dam's foundation. The moment the first piling touched water, Rowan stood up. "That's far enough," he called out. "You're on disputed territory." The hired guns ignored him, kept working. The sound of metal hammering into rock echoed through the valley. "I said that's far enough." Rowan's hand moved to his rifle. One of the hired guns, a thick-built man with a scarred face, looked up and smiled. "What are you going to do about it, Hale? Shoot us? That'll land you in prison right quick." "Won't shoot you for working," Rowan said, "but I will defend my property from theft, legal right of any landowner. Creek's not your property, it's water. Water flows. Water rights are property rights. Ask any lawyer." The scarred man set down his hammer and straightened, his hand hovering near his gun. "Maybe you should back down before someone gets hurt." Every rancher along the creek stood up now, rifles ready. Not aimed, not threatening directly, just ready. The message was clear. You escalate this, you'll be outnumbered. For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the creek running and the wind through the cottonwoods. Evelyn's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone could hear it. One wrong move, one hothead on either side, and this would turn into a bloodbath. "Stand down!" a voice called out. Maddox riding up on his horse. He surveyed the situation, his men outnumbered, the ranchers clearly willing to fight, and his face twisted with rage. But he wasn't stupid. A shootout would bring the law, and that was the last thing he wanted with a federal case pending. "Pull the pilings," he ordered his men. "We'll take this up through proper channels." The scarred man looked like he wanted to argue, but Maddox's glare silenced him. They extracted the pilings, loaded up their equipment, and left. Victory. A small one, temporary, but real. The ranchers had held the line. "He's going to try something else," Evelyn said that night as she and Rowan sat on their porch, exhausted. "Something we won't see coming." "I know." Rowan's hand found hers in the darkness. "We can't keep this up forever. Eventually someone's going to slip, or we'll miss a shift, or how long until Caleb's federal case gets heard? Could be months, could be never, if Maddox has any influence at the federal level." Rowan sighed heavily. "We need something more. Some way to actually stop him, not just slow him down." Evelyn thought about that as she lay awake that night. They had proof of Maddox's fraud, but proof meant nothing without a sympathetic judge. They had community support, but that would erode over time as people got tired and scared and desperate. They had moral authority, but morality didn't win wars against corrupt men with money and guns. What they needed was leverage, real leverage, something that would force Maddox to back down or destroy him if he didn't. The answer came from an unexpected source 3 days later. Della from the saloon rode out to the ranch, her face grim. "You need to hear this," she said without preamble. "I've got a girl who works for me, Sarah. She used to work at Maddox's ranch, kitchen help. He fired her last year when she refused his advances." Evelyn's stomach turned. "He assaulted her?" "Tried to. She got away, but barely. And she's not the only one." Della's jaw was tight. "There have been 3 other women over the years that I know of, maybe more. Maddox preys on hired help, women who can't fight back because they need the work. When they refuse him, he destroys their reputations, makes sure they can't get jobs anywhere in the territory." "That's..." Evelyn couldn't find words horrible enough. "That's monstrous." "Yeah. And it's also something people might actually care about, even if they don't give a damn about water rights or property fraud." Della looked between them. "Sarah's willing to talk, to testify, if it comes to that. But she's scared. Needs to know she'll be protected. Rowan's face had gone hard as stone. She'll be protected. I give you my word. And the other women? Evelyn asked. Would they testify too? Maybe. If they see someone else being brave first. If they believe it might actually matter. Della pulled a folded paper from her coat. Sarah wrote down everything she remembers, dates, details, witnesses. It's not legal proof, but it's a start. Evelyn took the paper, her hands shaking with anger and something else. Hope, maybe, or determination. This wasn't just about water anymore. This was about stopping a man who'd been hurting people for years, destroying lives, hiding behind money and power. We'll use this, she said quietly. Carefully. But we'll use it. After Della left, Evelyn and Rowan sat at their scarred table and read Sarah's account. It was devastating, detailed, and it painted a picture of Garth Maddox that went beyond corrupt businessman into something far darker. If we make this public, Rowan said slowly, Maddox will come after Sarah with everything he has. He'll call her a liar, destroy her credibility, maybe worse. I know. Evelyn set the paper down. But if we don't, he keeps getting away with it, keeps hurting people. And even if we win the water rights case, he's still out there, still powerful, still dangerous. So what do we do? Evelyn thought for a moment. We don't make it public, not yet. We use it as leverage. Let Maddox know we have testimony from his victims, that we're willing to bring it to the territorial authorities if he doesn't back down. Give him a chance to walk away quietly. You think he'll take it? No, but we have to try. She met Rowan's eyes. And if he doesn't, then we burn his whole empire down. The water fraud, the assault allegations, every corrupt thing he's ever done. We make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Garth Maddox is. Rowan studied her face for a long moment. You've changed, he said finally. Since you got here, you're harder, stronger, scarier. He smiled slightly. I like it. Despite everything, Evelyn laughed. Good, because I'm not done yet. They decided to approach Maddox one final time, to offer him a way out. It was dangerous, confronting a man like that with evidence of his crimes, but it had to be done. Rowan wanted to go alone, but Evelyn refused. We're partners, she reminded him. That means we face him together. They rode to Maddox's ranch the next morning, just the two of them. His hired guns met them at the gate, clearly suspicious, but Maddox must have been curious because they were allowed through. He was waiting on his porch, that cold smile fixed in place. Well, well, the happy couple, come to surrender? We've come to make you an offer, Evelyn said, dismounting. One chance to end this without destroying yourself. Maddox laughed. You think you can destroy me? That's adorable. Rowan pulled out Sarah's written testimony, held it up. We have detailed accounts from multiple women you've assaulted over the years. Dates, witnesses, everything. We also have proof your water rights claim is fraudulent. No territorial record supporting your grandfather's filing. And we're gathering evidence of other fraudulent land deals you've made. The smile slipped from Maddox's face. That's slander. I'll sue you for everything. Sue us, Evelyn interrupted. Please do. That'll make everything public, which is exactly what we want. Every newspaper in the territory will print those women's stories. Every detail of your corruption will come out in court testimony. Your reputation, such as it is, will be destroyed. Nobody will believe them. They're just women you had power over? Women who'll stand up and speak truth anyway? Evelyn stepped closer, her voice dropping to something cold and hard. You made a mistake when you hit me, Maddox. You showed me exactly what kind of man you are, and I'll spend every resource I have making sure everyone else sees it too. Maddox's face had gone red, veins standing out on his forehead. You're making threats you can't back up. Try us, Rowan said. Here's the offer. You withdraw your water rights claim. You leave this valley and never come back. You sell off your ranch at fair price, no fraud, and you disappear. Do that, and we keep the assault allegations quiet. Sarah and the others won't have to relive their trauma in public testimony. And if I refuse, then we bring everything into the light. Federal court for the water fraud, territorial authorities for the assaults, civil suits from every person you've ever cheated. We'll bury you in legal action until you're bankrupt and imprisoned. Evelyn's voice didn't waver. Your choice. Walk away with your freedom or lose everything fighting us. Maddox stared at them, calculation warring with rage on his face. You think you're so righteous, so noble, but you're just like me, willing to do whatever it takes to win. No, Rowan said quietly. We're giving you a choice. You never gave your victims that courtesy. Get off my property. Maddox's voice shook with barely controlled fury. And if I see either of you here again, I'll shoot you as trespassers, legal right of any landowner. He threw Rowan's own words back at him, mocking. But underneath the bravado, Evelyn could see something else. Fear. Real fear. They'd actually gotten to him. They rode away in silence, Evelyn's heart still racing. She'd just threatened one of the most dangerous men in the territory, had forced him into a corner with no good options. It should have felt terrifying. Instead, it felt powerful. He's not going to take the offer, Rowan said once they were out of earshot. I know. He's going to retaliate. Hard. I know that too. Evelyn looked at her husband, this quiet man who'd learned to speak through actions, who'd saved a valley from a stampede, and was now fighting a war he never wanted. Are you scared? Terrified. Rowan's hand found hers. But I'm done letting fear make my decisions. Spent 6 years afraid to let anyone close, afraid to hope for anything. Look where that got me, alone in an empty house just surviving instead of living. He squeezed her hand. You taught me that some things are worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. Like water rights? Like you. He said it simply, without drama or poetry, just fact. Like us. Like the life we're building together. Evelyn's throat tightened. They'd never said the words, I love you, but maybe they didn't need to. This was love. Fighting beside each other, choosing to stay when leaving would be easier, building something real out of harsh materials and impossible odds. Then we see this through, she said, whatever comes. What came was worse than they expected. That night fire broke out in Silas's mercantile. The whole building went up in flames before anyone could stop it, taking with it most of the town's supplies and all of Silas's livelihood. He stood in the street watching it burn, his face blank with shock. Maddox, he said numbly. Had to be. Can you prove it? The sheriff asked. He was a decent man but outmatched, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating violence. No, but everyone knows. The sheriff sighed. Knowing and proving are different things, Silas. Without evidence, Maddox keeps burning down anyone who stands against him. Silas turned away from the flames, his face hardening. Fine. He wants a war. He's got one. But the ranchers were scared now. Challenging Maddox over water rights was one thing. Having your livelihood literally burned down was another. Two of the men who'd been holding the line at the creek quietly withdrew, claiming they couldn't afford to risk more retaliation. Can't blame them, Ruth said when the remaining ranchers gathered at Rowan and Evelyn's ranch. They've got families to protect. Maddox made his point. Cross him and you lose everything. So we just give up? Evelyn asked, frustration bleeding through. Let him win because we're afraid? We're not all as brave as you, Mrs. Hale, one of the older ranchers said, not unkindly. Some of us have more to lose. We all have everything to lose. That's the point. But even as Evelyn said it, she could see the doubt in their faces. Fear was contagious, and Maddox had weaponized it effectively. The meeting broke up with no resolution. Half the ranchers committed to continuing the fight, half wanted to negotiate some kind of compromise with Maddox. The united front was crumbling. That night, Evelyn lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out their next move. They still had the assault testimony, still had proof of fraud. But without community support, without the ability to hold the creek against Maddox's workers, they were just two people against an empire. Can't sleep either? Rowan said from beside her. Too angry. She turned to face him in the darkness. We were so close, had him scared, and now he's fighting back the only way he knows how. Violence and intimidation. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Maybe we pushed too hard, gave him no choice but to escalate. You think we should have taken a gentler approach? I think maybe there's no gentle approach with men like Maddox. They see kindness as weakness, negotiation as surrender. He exhaled slowly. I don't know, Evelyn. I'm good at fixing fences and working cattle. This, politics and legal battles and playing chess with people's lives, I'm out of my depth. We both are. She found his hand under the blanket, held it. But we're in it together. That has to count for something. Does it? Because right now it feels like we're just two people about to lose everything they've fought for. The despair in his voice cut through her. Rowan had already lost everything once. His first family, his hope, his willingness to trust in anything good. He'd rebuilt, slowly and painfully, and now it was all threatening to collapse again. We're not giving up, Evelyn said fiercely. I don't care how scared people are, how outmatched we are. We have truth on our side, and we have each other. That's enough. Is it? It has to be. Morning brought unexpected news. A rider came from town, one of Della's employees, with a message. 3 more women had come forward, willing to testify about Maddox's assaults. Sarah's bravery had inspired them. They wanted justice, even if it meant facing him publicly. That's 4 women, Evelyn said, reading the message. 4 testimonies corroborating the same pattern of behavior. That's not slander or rumor. That's evidence. Evidence the territorial authorities might ignore, Rowan warned. Maddox probably has them in his pocket too. Maybe, but we can make enough noise that they can't ignore it. Send the testimonies to every newspaper in the territory. Make it public whether the authorities act or not. That'll destroy those women's reputations. You know how people are? They'll blame the victims, call them liars, say they were asking for it. I know. Evelyn's chest ached with the unfairness of it. But it's their choice, and they're willing to make it if it means stopping Maddox from hurting anyone else. They spent the day gathering the testimonies, documenting everything carefully. Evelyn interviewed each woman, writing down their stories with as much detail as they could bear to share. It was brutal work, hearing about what Maddox had done, seeing the trauma in these women's faces. But it was also powerful. Each story reinforced the others, creating an undeniable pattern. This wasn't gossip or revenge. This was truth. By evening, they had 4 detailed accounts, each signed and witnessed. Evelyn stared at the stack of papers, feeling the weight of what they represented. These women's pain, their courage, their hope that speaking out might matter. We send these out tomorrow, she said to Rowan. Every newspaper, the territorial governor, the federal court handling the water rights case. Make it impossible for anyone to claim ignorance. Maddox will retaliate. Let him. We're done hiding from him. But that night, as they finalized the documents, a thought occurred to Evelyn. What if we go to Maddox first, show him what we have, give him one final chance to surrender before we make everything public? Rowan looked at her like she'd lost her mind. That's insane. He already turned down our offer once. Why would now be different? Because now we have more evidence, more women willing to speak. And because, she paused, working through the logic, because if we blindside him, make everything public without warning, he's got nothing to lose. He'll fight to the death, take everyone down with him. But if we give him a chance to walk away first to preserve some dignity, you think he deserves dignity? No. But I think we need to try every option before we burn everything down. Evelyn met his eyes. One more conversation. If he refuses again, we go nuclear. Agreed? Rowan clearly thought it was a terrible idea, but he nodded. One more conversation. But I'm bringing every gun we own, and we're not going alone. They arranged to meet Maddox on neutral ground, the main street of Dry Hollow Ridge, in front of witnesses. Brought Silas, Della, and 3 of the ranchers still willing to stand against Maddox, safety in numbers. Maddox arrived with his own people, the hired guns who'd been working the creek. The 2 groups faced each other in the dusty street like something out of a frontier legend. Evelyn would have found it absurd if the stakes weren't so deadly serious. This better be good, Maddox said, his voice dripping contempt. You're wasting my time. Evelyn held up the stack of testimonies. 4 women, Garth. 4 detailed accounts of sexual assault spanning 5 years. Dates, locations, witnesses. We're taking this to every authority and newspaper in the territory unless you withdraw your water claim and leave the valley. This is your last chance. Maddox's face went pale, then red. You wouldn't dare. Those women would be destroyed. They're willing to risk it to stop you, Evelyn interrupted. They're braver than you'll ever be. For a long moment, Maddox just stared at the papers like they were a snake about to strike. Evelyn could see him calculating, weighing his options. Pride against survival. Power against exposure. You're bluffing, he said finally, but there was no conviction in it. "Read them." Evelyn thrust the papers at him. "Read what you did to these women and tell me we're bluffing." Maddox took the papers with shaking hands, read the first page, then the second. With each line, his face grew darker, his jaw tighter. When he finished, he looked up at Evelyn with pure hatred. "You self-righteous little—" He stopped, breathing hard. "Fine. You want to play it this way? Let's play. I've got lawyers who will tear these women apart on the stand. I've got witnesses who will swear I was nowhere near these incidents. I've got enough money to fight you in court for the rest of your lives." "And we've got the truth," Evelyn said quietly. "That's worth more than all your money." "The truth?" Maddox laughed, harsh and bitter. "The truth is that power wins, always has, always will. You can have your moral victory while you're losing your ranch, your reputation, everything you've built. See how much truth matters then." He threw the papers back at her and turned away. "I'm not backing down. Build your case, drag those women through hell testifying, waste years in court. I'll still be here when it's all over, and you'll be broken and gone. That's the truth." He mounted his horse and rode off, his hired guns following. Evelyn stood in the street holding the scattered testimonies, watching him disappear, and felt something cold settle in her chest. They'd tried, given him every chance, and he'd chosen war. "So we make it public," Della said, helping gather the papers. "Show everyone what he really is." "Yeah." Evelyn's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "We make it public." That night, they prepared packages for every newspaper, every official, every person who might have the power to act. Included copies of the assault testimonies, the evidence of fraud from the territorial records, documentation of Maddox's pattern of corruption. Everything they had. "Once these go out, there's no taking it back," Rowan warned. "Maddox will come at us with everything." "I know. We could still leave. Pack up, head somewhere new. Start over where he can't reach us." Evelyn looked around their small house. The curtains she'd made, the table they'd sat at through endless planning sessions, the bed where they'd finally learned to trust each other. This place that had seemed so empty and hostile when she'd first arrived now felt like home, worth fighting for. "I'm not running," she said. "Are you?" Rowan smiled, tired but genuine. "No, I'm done running from things that scare me." They sent the packages out the next morning, carried by riders heading in all directions across the territory. Within a week, the stories would be everywhere. Maddox's crimes laid bare for all to see. Now came the hard part. Waiting. Hoping that enough people would care, that some authority would act, that truth would actually matter in a world that seemed designed to protect men like Garth Maddox. The response started within days. The first newspaper printed Sarah's story with the headline, "Prominent Rancher Accused of Serial Assault." Then another paper picked it up, and another. The territorial governor's office sent an investigator. The federal judge overseeing the water rights case requested additional documentation. People were paying attention. But so was Maddox. 3 days after the first story broke, someone took shots at Rowan while he was working the north pasture. The bullets missed, but barely. A warning that Maddox was done with subtle threats. "We need to leave," Silas said when he heard. "Get you two somewhere safe until this blows over." "If we leave, Maddox wins," Evelyn argued. "He gets the water, gets to continue his corruption, gets away with everything." "Better than getting killed, is it?" She looked at the faces around her, ranchers and townsfolk who'd stood with them, who'd risked their own safety to fight Maddox. "We've come too far to quit now," Ruth spoke up, her old voice firm. "Girl's right. We finally got Maddox on the run, investigators asking questions, newspapers printing truth, people starting to believe us. We walk away now. All that momentum dies." "So what do we do?" one of the ranchers asked. "Just wait here and hope he doesn't burn us out like he did Silas?" "We protect each other," Rowan said. "No one stays alone. We group up, take shifts watching, make sure Maddox can't pick us off one by one." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. The remaining supporters, 8 ranching families plus Della and Silas from town, organized themselves into something like a resistance, shared resources, shared watch duties, shared the constant fear that Maddox would escalate beyond threats. A week passed, then 2. The territorial investigator interviewed Sarah and the other women, took their statements seriously, seemed genuinely appalled by what he heard. The federal judge ruled that Maddox's water rights claim was suspended pending review of the fraud allegations. Small victories that felt enormous. But Maddox was quiet. Too quiet. His hired guns were nowhere to be seen, his ranch seemingly abandoned. It felt like the calm before something terrible. "He's planning something," Rowan said, staring at Maddox's property through a spyglass. "Something big." "Let him plan," Evelyn replied, though her stomach churned with dread. "We've done everything we can. Now we wait for the system to work." "And if it doesn't?" She didn't have an answer for that. The answer came on a cold morning 3 weeks after they'd made everything public. Evelyn woke to the sound of hoofbeats, dozens of them, approaching fast. She and Rowan stumbled outside to find the Valley ranchers gathering, their faces urgent. "Maddox is gone," Silas said, breathless from riding. "Packed up last night and left. His ranch is empty, his hired guns dismissed. He's just gone." Evelyn couldn't quite process it. Gone where? Nobody knows. But the territorial investigator issued a warrant for his arrest yesterday on the assault charges. And the federal judge ruled his water rights claim completely fraudulent, ordered him to pay restitution to everyone he'd tried to extort. Silas was grinning now. He ran. Maddox actually ran. The news spread through the group like wildfire. They'd won. Against impossible odds, with nothing but truth and stubborn determination, they'd actually won. Rowan pulled Evelyn into his arms, held her tight. She could feel him shaking, relief or disbelief or exhausted joy. She couldn't tell. Maybe all three. "We did it," he said against her hair. "You did it." "We did it," she corrected. "Together." Around them, the ranchers were celebrating, slapping each other's backs, talking over each other in relief and excitement. But Evelyn just stood there in Rowan's embrace, feeling the weight of the past months finally lifting. They'd fought a war and survived. Built something real out of impossible circumstances. Proven that sometimes, not always but sometimes, the truth actually mattered. It was enough. For now, it was enough. But victory didn't feel the way Evelyn had imagined. There was no sudden lightness. No moment where everything transformed into something easy and perfect. Maddox was gone. Yes. The water rights were secure. The women who'd testified were finally believed. But the cost of winning sat heavy on all of them. Silas's mercantile was still a pile of charred timber and ash. Jake Morrison was still drinking himself to death in that lean-to shack, his land gone and his bitterness undiminished by Maddox's defeat. The 4 women who'd come forward were dealing with exactly the judgment and cruelty they'd feared. Whispers in town, turned backs, neighbors who suddenly didn't recognize them on the street. Sarah had stopped leaving Della's saloon entirely, too afraid of what people would say. "We won, but it doesn't feel like winning," Evelyn said to Rowan a week after Maddox fled. They were sitting on their porch watching the sun set over the valley, the same view that had seemed so desolate when she'd first arrived. "Those women are suffering for telling the truth. Silas lost everything. Half the ranchers are still struggling to recover from the damage Maddox did." "I know." Rowan's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing with an ease that would have been impossible 3 months ago. "But Maddox is gone. He can't hurt anyone else. That counts for something." "Does it count enough?" He didn't answer because there wasn't a good answer. Justice was messy. Winning cost more than anyone wanted to pay. And even when you did everything right, people still got hurt. The next morning, Evelyn woke with a plan forming. She couldn't fix everything. Couldn't give Jake his land back, couldn't erase the cruelty those women faced, couldn't rebuild Silas's mercantile with magic. But she could do something, take action instead of wallowing in the complicated aftermath of victory. She found Rowan in the barn, mucking out stalls. His ribs had finally healed enough that he could do full ranch work again, though she still caught him wincing sometimes when he moved wrong. "I want to help them," she said without preamble. "The women who testified. They sacrificed their reputations to stop Maddox. The least we can do is make sure they're not abandoned by the community they protected." Rowan set down his pitchfork. "What did you have in mind?" "I don't know yet, but something. Anything." Evelyn's frustration bled through. "It's not fair that they're being punished for his crimes." "Fair doesn't live out here." Rowan's voice was gentle. "You know that by now." "Then maybe we make it live here. Create it ourselves if it won't come on its own." He studied her face for a long moment, then smiled. A real smile, The kind she saw more often now, but that still felt precious and rare. All right, let's create some fairness. They started with Sarah. Evelyn rode into town and found her in the back room of Della's saloon, looking pale and worn. "Mrs. Hale," Sarah said, surprised. "I didn't expect—" "I came to say thank you," Evelyn interrupted. "What you did, testifying against Maddox, that took more courage than anything I've ever seen. You saved this valley, saved women he would have hurt in the future, and you deserve better than how this town is treating you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "They think I'm lying, or that I wanted it, or that I'm trying to destroy a good man's reputation for attention." Her voice cracked. "I knew it would be like this, but knowing doesn't make it easier." "No, it doesn't." Evelyn sat beside her. "But you're not alone, and I'm going to make sure everyone in this valley knows what you did was right and brave, starting now." She convinced Della to let her use the saloon that evening for a gathering, women only. Sent word through Ruth, through the ranchers' wives, through every woman she'd met in those weeks when they'd come to help during Rowan's recovery. Didn't explain why, just asked them to come. 23 women showed up, cramming into Della's back room, curious and wary. Evelyn stood at the front with Sarah beside her. The young woman had tried to refuse, but Evelyn had been firm. "Most of you know Sarah," Evelyn began. "She worked at Maddox's ranch until he fired her. What some of you might not know is why he fired her, or what he tried to do to her first." She let Sarah tell her own story. Watched the women's faces shift from skepticism to horror to anger, as Sarah described Maddox cornering her in the kitchen, his hands on her, her desperate fight to get away. When Sarah finished, she was crying, but she'd gotten through it. Stood there with her truth visible for all to see. "Sarah and 3 other women came forward," Evelyn continued. "Risked everything to stop Maddox from hurting anyone else. They're why he's gone. Why your daughters and sisters and friends are safe from him now. And yet they're the ones being shunned, called liars, treated like they did something wrong." Ruth stood up from the back. "You're asking us to believe them." "I'm asking you to see them," Evelyn said. "Really see them. These are women who had everything to lose and nothing to gain by speaking up. They did it anyway. Because it was right. Because someone had to. Men like Maddox," one of the rancher's wives spoke up, her voice uncertain. "They're powerful. Respected. How do we know?" "Because power doesn't make someone good," Evelyn interrupted. "And respect built on fear and lies isn't respect at all. Maddox spent years hurting people while everyone looked away because it was easier than believing uncomfortable truths. But we don't have to keep doing that. We can choose to stand with the women who were brave enough to speak." The room was silent. Then Della stepped forward. "Sarah's been working for me for a year," she said. "Best employee I've ever had. Honest, hardworking, kind. And she's been living in terror that whole time, afraid Maddox would find out where she was and come after her again." Della's voice hardened. "I believe her, and I'm ashamed it took her being this brave for me to say so publicly." One by one, other women stood, voiced their support, shared their own stories of Maddox's cruelty, not assault, but the smaller violences, the way he'd spoken to them, looked at them, made them feel unsafe, a pattern that had been invisible until someone named it. By the time the gathering ended, Sarah wasn't alone anymore. She had allies, a community that saw her not as damaged or shameful, but as brave. It wasn't perfect. Some women still wouldn't believe. Some thought Sarah had brought trouble on herself. But it was something, a start. "Thank you," Sarah said to Evelyn as people were leaving. I didn't know anyone would—" "You deserve support from the beginning," Evelyn said. "I'm sorry it took this long." Over the next weeks, Evelyn worked to rebuild what Maddox had broken. She organized the Valley women to help Silas clear the mercantile site, salvage what could be saved, convinced the ranchers to pool resources and loan Silas enough to start rebuilding. It would take months, maybe years, but the mercantile would rise again. She visited Jake Morrison in his shack, brought food and company even when he was too drunk to appreciate either. Couldn't give him back his land, but she could remind him he wasn't forgotten, that someone saw his pain even if they couldn't fix it. And slowly, grudgingly, the valley began to heal. But Evelyn's real work was at home, with Rowan. They'd survived the battle against Maddox, but they were still learning how to actually be married, How to live together when you'd been forged in crisis and suddenly found yourself in peace. It was harder than fighting. At least fighting had clear enemies and obvious goals. Marriage was subtle and complicated and required a different kind of courage. "I don't know how to do this," Rowan admitted one night. They were lying in bed, their bed now, both of them together, instead of Rowan sleeping in the barn. It had taken weeks after Maddox's defeat for him to accept that it was safe, that Evelyn actually wanted him there. The quiet parts, the normal parts. "I know how to survive, how to work, how to fight. But this," he gestured vaguely at the intimacy between them. "I don't have practice at this." "Neither do I." Evelyn turned to face him in the darkness. "I thought I knew what marriage would be. Courting and romance and someone who'd tell me I was beautiful every day. Instead, I got a silent man who left me coffee and fixed things without being asked and almost died saving people he barely knew." "That a complaint?" "No, it's an observation." She found his hand, held it. "I think maybe we've been doing marriage all along, just not the version either of us expected." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "My first marriage, with Sarah and Clara. I thought I knew how to be a husband, a father, thought I was building something that would last, and then they were just gone. And I realized I'd been lucky, not skilled, hadn't earned any of it. That's not true. Felt true. Still feels true sometimes." His voice dropped. "When I sent for you, I wasn't looking for love, just partnership, someone to share the work, keep the loneliness at bay. Figured love was something I'd had my chance at and lost." Evelyn's chest ached. "And now? Now I think maybe I was wrong." He turned toward her, his pale eyes catching the moonlight through the window. "Think maybe love isn't something you get once and lose forever. Maybe it's something you build, every day, through all the hard parts. Like hauling water and mending fences and fighting corrupt ranchers?" "Exactly like that." His thumb traced across her knuckles. "You terrify me, Evelyn. The way you make me hope again, the way you make me want things I thought I'd given up on. It's—" He stopped, searching for words. "It's worse than the stampede, more dangerous than Maddox, because if I lose you—" "You won't." She said it with more certainty than she felt, because the truth was that life offered no guarantees. People got sick, accidents happened. The frontier was unforgiving, but they could choose to hope anyway. To build something knowing it might not last forever, but building it anyway because the alternative was worse. "I love you," Rowan said, the words rough and unpracticed, but real. "Don't know if I'm good at it. Don't know if I'll ever be the husband who says pretty things or brings you flowers every week, but I love you. That enough?" Evelyn kissed him, soft and certain. "That's everything." Spring came to Dry Hollow Ridge with reluctant warmth and the first real rain in months. The valley turned green overnight, wildflowers erupting across the hillsides in riots of color. Evelyn planted a garden, her first real one, seeds Ruth had given her with detailed instructions on what would survive the climate. Half of it died anyway, but half of it thrived, which felt like victory. The federal court formally ruled on the water rights case, declaring Sweetwater Creek open water accessible to all properties it crossed. Maddox's fraudulent claim was voided, and he was ordered to pay substantial fines and restitution. Since he'd fled and couldn't be located, the money came from the sale of his ranch, which the territorial government seized and auctioned off. Jake Morrison bought back a portion of his old land with the restitution money. It wasn't everything he'd lost, but it was something, a chance to rebuild. He was still drinking, still bitter, but Evelyn saw him working the land one morning and felt a small spark of hope that maybe he'd find his way back from the darkness. The 4 women who'd testified became something unexpected, leaders in the community. Sarah started teaching children to read in the back room of the rebuilt mercantile. The other women organized a group for widows and wives who needed support or refuge from difficult situations. They'd survived speaking truth and found power in that survival. "They're changing things," Evelyn said to Della one afternoon, watching Sarah work with a group of kids, "making the valley safer, better." "They're doing what you started," Della corrected. "Standing up when it was easier to stay quiet. Showing folks that courage doesn't always look like riding into stampedes. Sometimes it looks like telling the truth when everyone wants you to lie." Evelyn didn't know how to respond to that. She'd never set out to be anyone's example or inspiration. had just done what needed doing because the alternative was giving up, and she'd never been good at giving up. Summer brought the first real prosperity the valley had seen in years. With the water freely accessible and Maddox's predatory lending gone, the ranchers could actually focus on building their herds and improving their land. Rowan's cattle flourished. He hired help for the first time, 2 young men from town who wanted to learn ranching, and started expanding the operation. "We could build a bigger house," he suggested one evening. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual that had become sacred to both of them. More rooms, a proper kitchen, maybe a parlor where you could entertain when the valley women visit. "You want to entertain?" Evelyn teased. "You, who barely speaks to people?" "I'm getting better at speaking." He proved it by pulling her close, kissing her temple. "Besides, if we're going to have a family someday, we'll need more space." Family. The word hung between them, precious and terrifying. They'd never discussed it directly, though Evelyn had thought about it. Wondered if she could bear children safely out here, so far from hospitals and doctors. Wondered if Rowan could survive the fear of having a child again after losing Clara. "You want that?" she asked quietly. "A family?" "I want everything with you." His voice was certain. Kids, chaos, the whole impossible dream. Just not yet. Not until I'm sure I can handle the fear without it breaking me. "Whenever you're ready," Evelyn said. "Or if you're never ready. Either way is fine." "You'd be all right without kids?" She thought about it honestly. "I'd be all right with you, kids or no kids, as long as we're building this life together." They started planning the new house anyway. Something bigger, more permanent. A home built for a future they were finally brave enough to imagine. August brought news that Garth Maddox had been found in California, arrested on the outstanding warrant for assault. He'd be extradited back to face trial. The women who'd testified would have to relive their trauma in court, but they'd have justice. Real justice. Not just the satisfaction of him fleeing. "Are you nervous?" Evelyn asked Sarah the night before she was set to travel to the territorial capital for the trial. "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "His lawyers will try to destroy me on the stand, make me look like I'm lying or confused or—" She stopped, breathing hard. "But I'm doing it anyway. Because other women deserve to see that speaking up can matter, that powerful men can actually face consequences." The trial lasted 2 weeks. Evelyn followed it through newspaper reports, her stomach in knots the whole time. Maddox's lawyers did exactly what Sarah had predicted, tried to paint the women as opportunists, liars, women of questionable morals trying to extract money from a respectable businessman. But the prosecution had documentation, witnesses, the pattern of behavior too clear to dismiss. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the verdict was guilty on 3 counts of assault and 5 counts of fraud. Maddox was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison and ordered to pay additional restitution to his victims. The valley celebrated. Not with wild parties or excessive joy, the victory was too hard won for that, but with quiet satisfaction. Justice had been slow and imperfect, but it had arrived. Sarah came home different, stronger somehow. She'd faced Maddox in court, told her truth while he glared at her from the defendant's table, and survived. That kind of survival changed a person. "Thank you," she said to Evelyn, standing in the rebuilt mercantile surrounded by children's books and primer lessons, "for believing me, for making others believe, for—" her voice caught, "for giving me my life back." "You did that yourself," Evelyn said. "All I did was stand beside you." Sometimes that's everything. Fall arrived with crisp air and golden leaves in the cottonwoods. Rowan and Evelyn broke ground on the new house in late September, a structure twice the size of the original with proper bedrooms and a kitchen that would have made Evelyn's mother proud. The Valley ranchers showed up to help, a work party that turned into something like a celebration, everyone contributing labor and materials and shared hope for the future. "This is what community looks like," Ruth said, watching the walls go up. "Not perfect people, just folks willing to show up for each other." Evelyn thought about that as she worked alongside women who'd become friends, men who'd become allies. They were all flawed, all carrying their own damage and fear. But they'd chosen to build something together anyway, to create the kind of place they wanted to live in rather than accepting the harsh, cruel version that seemed inevitable. The house took shape over weeks, a structure that looked permanent, like it belonged to the land rather than being imposed on it. Rowan worked from dawn until dark, his injuries long healed, his body remembering how to move without pain. Evelyn watched him frame windows and thought about how much he'd changed since that first silent, wary man who'd picked her up from the stagecoach. They both had changed. The frontier did that, broke you down and rebuilt you into something harder, but also, somehow, more real. "What are you thinking?" Rowan asked one evening. They were standing in what would become their bedroom, the walls up, but the roof still open to the stars. "That I hated you a little when I first arrived," Evelyn admitted. "Thought you were cold and cruel and that I'd made a terrible mistake. You weren't wrong." He came to stand beside her, looking up at the vast sky. "I was cold. Cruel, maybe, in my silence. Definitely a mistake for someone who deserved better." "No." Evelyn turned to face him. "That's the thing I've learned out here. There is no deserving better. There's just what is. The life we have, the choices we make, the people we become through all the hard parts." "Philosophy now?" But he was smiling. "I'm serious." She took his hands. "I came here thinking I deserved romance and gentle courtship, and a husband who'd make everything easy. And maybe some version of me did deserve that. But the woman I've become, the one who fought beside you against Maddox, who stitched you back together, who learned to make coffee and bread and a life from nothing, she doesn't need easy. She needs real. And you're the realest thing I've ever known." Rowan pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. She felt him shaking slightly and realized he was crying. Silent tears, the kind that came from somewhere too deep for sound. "I thought I was dead inside," he said against her shoulder, "after Sarah and Clara. Thought the best parts of me died with them, and all that was left was survival, work, getting through each day. Then you showed up and—" He stopped, composing himself. "You made me remember what it felt like to hope, to want things, to believe maybe I could have a life instead of just an existence." They stood there in the half-built bedroom under the open stars, holding each other, and Evelyn understood that this was the moment. Not their wedding, that had been a legal formality between strangers. Not the first time they'd slept in the same bed or said I love you. This, right here. Two broken people choosing to build something together on ground they'd fought to keep. The house was finished by early November, just before the first snow. It wasn't fancy, no carved banisters or elegant fixtures, but it was solid and spacious and unmistakably theirs. They moved in on a cold, clear day, carrying their few possessions across the yard, while the Valley families cheered and brought food for an impromptu celebration. "Speech!" someone called out. "The Hales should say something!" Rowan looked panicked, but Evelyn squeezed his hand and stepped forward. "6 months ago," she began, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "I arrived in this valley thinking I was coming to a marriage. A partnership. A practical arrangement that would keep us both fed and sheltered. I didn't expect love, didn't expect community. Definitely didn't expect to fight a war against corruption and win." Laughter rippled through the group. "But we did all those things," Evelyn continued, "because of people like you. People who showed up when it mattered. Who stood against power even when it was dangerous. Who chose to be brave when being quiet would have been safer." She looked at Sarah, standing with the other women who'd testified. "We're all here because someone decided that truth mattered more than comfort, that justice was worth fighting for, that building a real community, one that protects its most vulnerable instead of sacrificing them, was possible." She paused, looking at Rowan. He gave her a small nod, encouraging. "This house isn't just ours," Evelyn said. "It's yours too. A symbol of what we can build when we work together, when we refuse to accept cruelty as inevitable, when we stand up for each other even when it costs us." She raised her cup. "To Dry Hollow Ridge. May we always be this stubborn and this brave." "To Dry Hollow Ridge," the crowd echoed, drinking and cheering. The celebration went late into the evening, people eating and talking and making music with a fiddle someone had brought. Evelyn watched it all from the porch of her new home, feeling something settle in her chest that she'd been chasing since her parents died. Belonging, purpose. A place in the world that was hers, not by birth or accident, but by choice and fight and earned connection. "You're doing it again," Rowan said, coming to stand beside her. "Doing what?" "Thinking too loud." He handed her a cup of hot cider. "What about this time?" "About how much everything's changed. How different my life is from what I imagined." She leaned into his solid warmth. 6 months ago, I would have called this a disaster. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else. You don't miss Boston, your old life? Sometimes. I miss my sisters, miss the convenience of stores and doctors nearby, miss feeling safe and comfortable. She considered it honestly, but I don't miss who I was there. That version of me was small, scared, convinced her only value was being decorative and agreeable. You're not exactly agreeable now. No, Evelyn smiled. Now I'm terrifying, apparently. I like it better. They stood together watching the party, the valley spread out below them in the darkness, and Evelyn thought about the journey that had brought her here. All the fear and pain and impossible choices. The woman she'd been wouldn't have survived this place, wouldn't have fought Maddox or testified against him or organized a community to protect assault victims. But that woman was gone. In her place stood someone forged by frontier life into something both harder and more real. Someone who knew that strength wasn't about never being afraid. It was about acting anyway. That love wasn't gentle words and easy comfort. It was showing up every day, doing the hard work, choosing someone over and over even when it cost you. Winter came hard that year, snow piling up until the valley was white and silent. Rowan and Evelyn spent long evenings by the fire in their new house, reading or talking or simply existing in comfortable quiet. They'd learned each other's rhythms, the way he needed silence to process while she needed to talk things through, the way she liked her coffee weak while he took his strong enough to strip paint, the small negotiations of marriage, learning to share space, building a life from 1,000 tiny compromises and accommodations. I want to tell you something, Rowan said one night in late December. They were in bed, snow falling softly outside the window, the whole world hushed and peaceful. About Sarah and Clara. About losing them. Evelyn waited, not pushing. He'd talk when ready. I blame myself, he said finally. Thought if I'd been better, worked harder, earned more money, gotten help sooner, they'd have survived. Spent 6 years carrying that guilt around like it was all I deserved. It wasn't your fault. I know that now, intellectually. But knowing and believing are different things. He turned to face her in the darkness. Meeting you, fighting alongside you, watching you be brave when I was terrified, it made me realize something. Life is random and cruel and unfair. We can do everything right and still lose. But we can also survive losing and find something new worth having. Is that what I am? Something new worth having? You're everything worth having. He said it simply without poetry or exaggeration, just fact. And I'm done letting fear of losing you stop me from actually having you, building a life with you. All of it. All of it? Evelyn's heart picked up speed. You mean... I mean kids if you want them. Expansion and chaos and terrifying vulnerability. The whole impossible dream. His hand found hers under the blanket. I'm ready, if you are. Evelyn thought about what that would mean. Pregnancy out here, far from hospitals. Childbirth with only a frontier doctor and midwives to help. Raising children in a harsh place that didn't forgive mistakes. It was dangerous and difficult and nothing like the safe, comfortable life she'd imagined having. It was also exactly what she wanted. I'm ready, she said. Spring brought new beginnings. Evelyn's garden thrived this year, row after row of vegetables breaking through the soil in defiant green. The cattle herd expanded. The valley prospered with Maddox gone and the water freely accessible. And in late March, Doc Brennan confirmed what Evelyn had already suspected. She was pregnant. You're sure you want this? Rowan asked that night, his hand on her still flat stomach, his face showing every ounce of fear he felt. It's dangerous out here. If something goes wrong, then we'll handle it together. Evelyn covered his hand with hers. I'm not your first wife, Rowan. I'm not Sarah. And this baby isn't Clara. We get to write our own story. Maybe it ends badly. Maybe we lose everything. But maybe we don't. Maybe we get years of chaos and joy and watching our kid grow up in this valley we fought to keep. That's a lot of maybes. That's all life is. Maybes and choices. She kissed him softly. I'm choosing this. With you. All of it. The pregnancy was difficult. Morning sickness that lasted all day. Exhaustion that made simple tasks feel impossible. Fear every time something hurt or felt wrong, that this would be the moment everything fell apart. But Evelyn had the valley women around her, Ruth and Sarah and Della and a dozen others who'd been through this before, who knew what was normal and what required the doctor's attention. Rowan was a disaster. Hovering, anxious, jumping at every grimace or complaint. Evelyn found it both annoying and endearing, this man who'd been so silent and distant, now unable to go 5 minutes without checking on her. "I'm fine," she said for the 1,000th time in late July. She was huge now, uncomfortable, counting down the days until this baby decided to arrive. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Women die doing this since the beginning of time too, Rowan said, his face pale. Statistics aren't comforting. Then stop reading medical books and go check on the cattle or something useful. He went, but she saw him through the window an hour later, still hovering near the house, finding excuses to stay close. Labor started on a hot August evening, sudden and intense. Evelyn had read about it, heard stories, thought she was prepared. She was not prepared. Nothing could prepare someone for the reality of it, the pain that came in waves, the exhaustion, the animal fear that she wouldn't survive this. "I changed my mind," she gasped between contractions. Ruth and Della were with her, Doc Brennan on his way. Rowan had been banished to the porch where she could hear him pacing. "This was a terrible idea." "Too late now, honey," Ruth said calmly. "Baby's coming whether you're ready or not." "I'm not ready. Nobody ever is." The labor lasted 14 hours. Evelyn screamed, cursed, promised never to do this again. She held Ruth's hand hard enough to bruise and thought she was dying, thought the baby was dying, thought this was the universe's way of punishing her for daring to hope for happiness. And then just when she was sure she couldn't take another second, there was pressure and release and a sound, a thin, angry wail that was the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. "It's a girl," Doc Brennan said, placing the bloody, squalling infant on Evelyn's chest. Healthy and mad as hell, Evelyn looked down at her daughter, that was her daughter, and started crying. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled and perfect, tiny fingers curled into fists, eyes squinted against the light, very much alive and very much hers. "Can I?" Rowan's voice from the doorway, hesitant. "Can I come in?" "Get in here," Evelyn said, crying and laughing at the same time. He crossed the room like he was walking on eggshells, afraid to hope this was real. When he saw the baby, his whole face crumbled. He knelt beside the bed, one hand hovering over the infant like he didn't dare touch. His voice broke. "She's perfect. She's ours." Evelyn guided his hand to rest on the baby's back. "We did this together." Rowan touched his daughter with infinite gentleness, tears streaming down his face. "What do we name her?" They discussed names but never settled on anything. Now, looking at this tiny person who'd fought her way into the world, Evelyn knew. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." "Hope Hale." Rowan tested it out, then smiled through his tears. "Yeah, that's perfect." The first weeks were chaos. Hope was a terrible sleeper, colicky and demanding and completely overwhelming. Evelyn walked the floor at 2 a.m, 3 a.m, every hour on the hour, trying to soothe her screaming daughter and wondering what she'd been thinking having a baby in the middle of the frontier. But there were also moments, quiet ones, usually at dawn, when Hope would finally sleep, curled against Evelyn's chest, and Evelyn would feel something so big it had no name. Love mixed with terror, mixed with awe, that this small person existed and was hers to protect. Rowan was surprisingly good with the baby once he got past his initial fear. He'd walk with Hope for hours when she was fussy, talking to her in that quiet voice about the ranch and the cattle and the life she'd grow up in. Evelyn would watch them and think about how far they'd all come. Her from Boston, Rowan from his grief, Hope from nothing into being. "She looks like you," Rowan said one evening. Hope was maybe 2 months old, finally sleeping in the cradle they'd built, both parents afraid to move lest they wake her. "She looks like a potato. A beautiful potato." He wrapped his arm around Evelyn's waist. "Thank you. For this. For everything. Thank you for making terrible coffee every morning and fixing things without being asked and riding into stampedes to save the valley. Those things aren't equivalent. They are to me." They stood together watching their daughter sleep. Two people who'd started as strangers and become something deeper through shared struggle and choice and the daily work of building a life together. Autumn came and went. Hope grew, started smiling, became slightly less of a screaming nightmare. The valley thrived. Silas's mercantile was fully rebuilt and doing better business than ever. Sarah opened a small school, teaching children to read and write. The women's support group became a permanent fixture, helping anyone who needed refuge or assistance. And slowly, almost without noticing, Dry Hollow Ridge transformed from a collection of struggling survivors into an actual community. The kind of place where people looked out for each other, where women could speak truth without being destroyed, where children learned to read, where hope, both the baby and the concept, could flourish. Evelyn thought about that transformation on Hope's first birthday. They threw a party, the whole valley invited, and watched their daughter demolish a small cake while surrounded by people who'd become family. Not blood family, but the chosen kind. The kind built through shared fight and mutual support and refusing to let cruelty win. "Speech," someone called out, and Evelyn groaned. She'd done enough speeches. But Rowan stood, pulling her up with him. "We'll do this together," he said quietly. Then, louder. "A year ago, this little terror entered our lives and made everything simultaneously harder and better." Laughter from the crowd. "But I'm not here to talk about Hope's birthday," Rowan continued. "I'm here to talk about what we've all built together. This valley, this community, the life we've created not because it was easy, but because it mattered." He looked at Evelyn and she picked up the thread. "When I came here, I thought the frontier was a wasteland, a place people ended up when they had no better options. I was wrong. The frontier is whatever we make it, and we've made it into something worth having, worth fighting for. We survived Maddox," Rowan said, "survived drought and stampedes and every kind of hardship this land could throw at us. But more than surviving, we thrived, built schools and businesses and families, created the kind of place where truth matters and justice is possible, and people take care of each other. None of us is perfect," Evelyn added. "We've all made mistakes, all got scars from the battles we fought, but we showed up for each other anyway. That's what community means. Not perfection, just presence." She looked at the faces around her, Ruth and Silas, Sarah and Della, Jake Morrison sober for the first time in months, the ranchers and their families, everyone who'd stood against Maddox and for each other. "So here's to us," Evelyn said, raising her cup. "To stubborn people who refuse to quit. To truth-tellers and bridge builders and everyone who chooses courage over comfort. To Dry Hollow Ridge. May we always be this difficult and this good." "To Dry Hollow Ridge!" the crowd echoed. Later, after everyone had gone home and Hope was finally asleep, Evelyn and Rowan sat on their porch watching the stars. The same stars that had seemed so indifferent when she'd first arrived now felt like old friends, witnesses to everything they'd survived and built. "Do you ever regret it?" Rowan asked. "Coming here, marrying me, all of it." Evelyn thought about the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach 7 months pregnant with fear and doubt. Thought about everything that woman had endured to become who Evelyn was now. The blisters and backache and bone-deep exhaustion, the terror of watching Rowan nearly die. The bruise on her face from Maddox's slap. The screaming agony of childbirth. "Not for a second," she said honestly. "This life is hard, harder than anything I imagined. But it's real. And I'd rather have something real and difficult than something easy and empty." That's very philosophical for midnight. I'm a mother now. We're allowed to be philosophical. She leaned into him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. "Besides, it's true. I learned something out here, fighting beside you. Love isn't what I thought it was. It's not romance or poetry or someone making everything easy. It's showing up, doing the hard work, choosing someone every single day, even when it costs you. Is that what you think we have?" "I know that's what we have." She tilted her face up to kiss him. "And I choose it. Choose you, every day, every hard, impossible, beautiful day." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the valley spread out before them in darkness. Somewhere in the house, Hope made a small sound in her sleep. Their daughter, their home. Their life built from nothing but determination and choice. The frontier had broken Evelyn down and rebuilt her into something stronger, had taken Rowan's grief and transformed it into hope. Had shown them both that sometimes the hardest paths lead to the best destinations. Not perfect destinations, not easy ones, but real. Worth having, worth fighting for. And in the end, that was everything.